Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the move of what if Deku's quirk came at a cruel price? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hisashi runs a hand through his hair and tugs at the snarls in it. This was getting him nowhere. Why would the government ever stop quirk research? He didn't care if it wasn't ethical, it was important. Besides, everyone has different morals and opinions on what is ethical. He leans back in his chair and runs his hands down his face. God, he didn't have time for this. A knock sounds at his office door and he sighs. What is it? He barks out. Inko opens the door and smiles softly at him. I was just coming in to ask if you wanted to eat dinner with me and Izuku, or if you just wanted to eat in here, she asks hesitantly. Hisashi closes his eyes and takes a deep breath. No need to get upset at his wife. This wasn't her problem. He could take his anger out on Izuku maybe. He's sure the quirkless brat has done something wrong today as usual. Wait, quirkless. Hisashi sits up quickly and looks back at his notes. That's what he needed to look at. The bridge between having a quirk and not having one had to be in him. In his useless son. It could show him how quirks first came about. His Ash dear? Inko inquires as she gently places a hand on his shoulder. Yes, I'll be out in a minute. I just realized something that changes everything about my research, Hisashi breathes out. Inko smiles brightly and squeezes his shoulder before heading out the door and towards the dining room where Izuku was waiting for them. She was so proud of her husband. She's sure only good things could come from this. Izuku didn't understand why he was going to work with his dad, but he wasn't about to complain. Last time he did, he got a burn up his arm from him. He learned quickly that he shouldn't question his dad. He was sure that was how it was for everyone though, so he didn't question it. I mean, he hadn't ever seen Kachin's dad do that to him, but he didn't have a fire quirk, so maybe that was why. Yeah, that was definitely why. Now, Izuku, you are going to be helping me with some very important work, so I expect you to be on your best behavior while you're here. Do you understand? Dad inquired, looking at Izuku in the rearview mirror. Izuku quickly nods his head, afraid of getting in trouble for talking. Tell me you understand, Dad asserts. Yes, I understand, Izuku squeaks out. Dad grunts and averts his gaze back to the road. Izuku didn't like the feeling of this, but he didn't know what to think. This was just so new and unexpected from his dad. Maybe everything will be just fine like it always was. Izuku scrambles out of the car the second it stops to avoid getting yelled at by his dad or worse, burned. His dad barely acknowledges him though as they walk into a big stone building. He wonders what they could possibly be doing here for his dad's work. Maybe it was a scavenger hunt or hide and seek. He hoped it was a scavenger hunt. He really enjoyed those even when the other kids would shove him to the ground and steal all the things he found. He still found them, so he was happy. Izuku follows his dad into the building and barely makes it inside before the door hits him in the back. The inside looked the same as the outside, just with a bunch of bright lights. They must have needed all of those lights because there were no windows. Keep up, Dad barks as he walks down the hall. Izuku quickly runs after him, almost tripping and falling flat on his face. That would have been quite embarrassing. I mean, he didn't see anyone else here, but that didn't mean that there weren't people somewhere watching. They stop at a door and his dad puts a badge up to a little black box and it makes a beeping noise and a bunch of little clicks. When the noises stop, Dad opens the door, then turns and looks at Izuku expectantly. Izuku quickly makes his way into the room. Someone will be in to check your vitals and draw some blood. Behave, Dad coldly explains. Then he turns and leaves and the door shuts with a slam and a clicking noise. Izuku didn't like being alone, especially in such an unfamiliar place like this. He supposes the best thing he can do at the moment is get familiar with it. Maybe that would help. It was something to do at least. He takes a look around the room and it's very plain and small. The walls and floor are all white and almost seem to blend together. There was a futon in the corner and a mirror covering the majority of one of the walls. There were 3 doors in the whole room. The one he came in, one next to the mirror and one across from the mirror and next to the futon. There was nothing else he could see in the room. It made him a little uncomfortable. He was used to his room at home with a bed and all of his All Might posters and figurines. He much preferred his room to this one. Izuku flinches when the door to the hallway opens. A tall, skinny man with pink hair walks in looking down at a clipboard in his hands. The man looks up and smiles at him as another person pushes a cart into the room then leaves, the door shutting behind them. "Hello there." The man pauses and looks back down at the clipboard. Izuku. I'm going to be checking your vitals and taking a couple vials of blood from you. I will also be like your partner here. I'll take care of you, take your vitals, and help the doctor with his experiments with you. I will also try to bring you gifts and other comforts. Oh, I'm rambling and I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Seiki. Shall we get started then? Izuku hesitantly nods his head and Seiki's smile seems to get bigger. Alrighty then, just sit down on this stool and we'll get started right away. Seiki chirps and nods to a stool next to the cart. Izuku swallows and creeps to the stool and sits down. This was reminding him a little too much of the last time he went to the doctor. He didn't think this was a hospital or doctor's office though. He didn't know what to think. He just wanted to get everything done quickly. Izuku shivers sitting under the covers of the futon. Seiki had just left after taking a couple vials of his blood. He didn't like watching the blood leave his arm and it made him kinda nauseous. It had also gotten really cold in the room. He was wearing short sleeves and shorts and it felt like they had the air conditioning cranked up high. He had decided that maybe the covers would help warm him up and they kinda did. He was also really tired and sitting down wasn't helping that. He was sure he just woke up maybe a couple of hours ago so he shouldn't be this tired. He was sure it would be fine if he took a little nap. Hopefully his dad wouldn't get too mad at him for doing that. Izuku jolts awake to a door slamming open and he quickly looks around to try and figure out which door and who it was. "Good morning, Izuku," Seiki sings out and smiles when Izuku's eyes land on him. "All that vital taking yesterday really took you out, huh? Well, hopefully you have enough strength to get through some of the stuff we have today," Seiki hums. "I brought you breakfast," he says brightly and lifts the tray in his hand when Izuku doesn't move. Izuku hesitantly gets out of the futon and pads over to where Seiki is standing. Seiki smiles brightly at him and hands him the tray. Izuku takes it and looks it over. There is a bowl of miso soup and rice along with a tamagoyaki. Overall it looked really good and there was even a set of chopsticks for him. "I've got to go set some stuff up and then I'll be right back to get you. You're going to be doing a physical today just to see where you stand on that front. I have to say though, you are one of the healthier ones of our group right now," Seiki explains, then leaves just as quickly as he had come in. Izuku goes to one of the corners in the room and plops down and starts to eat. The meal was actually quite good. Not as good as Mama's but still enjoyable. He wondered why he was even still here though. Why did Saki say yesterday? Was it not still the same day? Why would Dad have Izuku stay at his job? Nothing made sense. If Mama was here she would explain what was going on, but she wasn't. Tears well in Izuku's eyes and he bites his lip harshly to try and stop them. Dad didn't like it when he cried and the other kids at school made fun of him when he did. He just needed to eat his breakfast and do whatever Seiki had set up for him. He didn't know what a physical was, but it didn't sound too bad. Izuku didn't know how long it had been since he first got here, but it felt like a long time. Based on the times he got breakfast, he would guess 5. He had gotten settled in. It still felt odd but normal. He didn't know if he liked that this felt normal to him now. He missed being tucked in every night, Mama's cooking, all his All Might merch. Going outside. Izuku shakes his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He couldn't think about that. It made him antsy and feel trapped, like he was. Izuku quickly blinks the tears away. He just had to focus on what was next. Yeah, what was next? He still needed to do his schoolwork for today. It felt like something big was going to happen today though. Seiki seemed to be hyping it up for the past few visits. Something about the first big thing. He couldn't remember the exact wording he used. It didn't feel important at the time. Izuku shifts to his side and looks at the mirror on the wall. He couldn't see himself in it from the futon. He was kinda glad that he couldn't. He always looked so much sadder than he thought. He seemed to have lost his freckles. A knock sounds at the door and Seiki steps into the room. "Hey bud, you ready for today? It's finally the big day. Your first injection." You aren't getting any breakfast today. We just don't want you to have any complications during the injection that cause you to choke on your own throw-up. I'm sure you understand. Anyways, you should have a gown in your dresser that you need to get changed into before we do the injection. I'll be with you the whole time. Go ahead and get dressed, and then I'll let the doctor know that you are ready to begin, Seiki explains with a smile. Something about his smile felt wrong, but Izuku couldn't figure it out. Best just do what he was told. Izuku gets out of bed and opens up a drawer of his dresser and finds the gown that Seiki told him about. He grabs it and turns around and sees Seiki watching. Izuku shrinks under his gaze and then starts to head into the bathroom. No need to go in there to change, I don't mind, Seiki stated. Izuku flinches. He didn't want to change in front of Seiki, but he was scared of what would happen if he didn't obey. Dad would always burn him when he disobeyed. He wondered what Seiki would do. He didn't want to find out. Izuku shrinks into himself and starts to take off his clothing. He stared at the floor and tries to ignore Seiki's eyes on him. He hoped he didn't have to take his underwear off as well. It felt wrong. His body was his and that was private. Seiki says nothing as Izuku takes his shirt and breathes off and puts the gown on. Izuku quickly glances up at Seiki and sees him smiling and looking Izuku up and down. Izuku quickly looks back down. Good boy, Seiki leered. I'll let the doctor know you're ready then, Seiki states and heads out the door. Izuku squeezes his arms to his chest. A shake racks through his body and tears well in his eyes. He didn't like that one bit. He never wanted Seiki to look at him like that again. Seiki steps back into the room a few moments later. He'll be ready for you in a couple minutes. I'm going to go help him. He'll come out of the room next to the mirror and I'll be waiting for you in the room. See you in a bit, Seiki explains and then heads back out into the hall. Izuku wasn't excited for the injection one bit. He was nervous about it before, but now that it was here he was terrified. Seiki didn't make him feel any better about it. He made Izuku feel worse. The door next to the mirror gets thrown open and Dad is standing in it looking at him expectantly. Dad must be the doctor then, or maybe he was just there to be with Izuku. Probably not. Dad rolls his eyes and Izuku realizes that he was supposed to go into the room. He quickly darts into the room past him. Once he gets into the room, there is a sheet on the wall next to his room and an operating table in the middle of the room. There were a bunch of carts and tables with scary doctor supplies as well. Izuku didn't like being here. He takes a glance back and sees that the door back to his room was closed and Dad was coming into the room himself. All right, buddy, let's get you up onto the table, Seiki says suddenly and Izuku jumps. He turns and sees him smiling standing next to the table. Seiki picks Izuku up by his armpits and sets him down on the table. Izuku shivers as his skin hits the cold padding of the table. Lay down, Dad snaps. Izuku quickly lays down and tries not to shiver as more of his skin is against the cold table. Seiki starts to set some things up and straps his arms and legs down to the table. All right, open your mouth, Seiki says, holding something. Izuku hesitantly opens his mouth and a mouth block thing gets put into his mouth. This is just so you don't bite your own tongue off or break your teeth. We aren't quite sure what is going to happen with this and you're our first go. I'll be here with you the whole time though, Seiki explains with a soft smile. Izuku involuntarily shivers and gently bites down on the thing in his mouth to try and get used to it. A couple things get hooked up and put onto or into him. Seiki and Dad say things back and forth to each other, but none of it makes sense to Izuku. All right, Izuku, you ready? Seiki asks and comes and stands next to him. Izuku shakes his head. He didn't want to do this. Ah, don't be like that, Seiki coos and turns his head towards him. Izuku's eyes lock with his and everything melts away. All he feels now is calm. There we go, now doesn't that feel better, Seiki murmurs. Seiki's eyes quickly dart up to Dad and he nods his head. Izuku couldn't figure out why he would do that. He couldn't even remember where he was or why he was there. That was fine though, everything felt great, peaceful even. Izuku heard someone talking but he couldn't quite make out what they were saying and he didn't care. All he cared about was how great he felt right now. The best he had felt in a while actually. Suddenly searing pain shoots up Izuku's arm and through his body. He instinctively bites down and starts to scream. Memories of what he was doing before slam back into him and he tries to wiggle free of his restraints, tries to get away from the pain. He hears someone trying to talk to him but he can't understand what they are saying. He wanted this to stop. It hurts. Things start to gray around the edges and Izuku isn't quite sure what happens next. Izuku comes back to himself sitting at his desk looking at his schoolwork. He was almost done but he has no recollection of what he did or learned. He looks closer at the screen and tries to figure out what he was just doing. He has some recollection of the concepts but it's sort of foggy. Izuku lifts his hands up to scroll through more of the work and flinches when he sees scarring on his hands. When did that happen? His hands also looked bigger, like he had grown. Izuku didn't like this. It felt wrong. He felt like he could grab some snippets of what had happened but not much. Izuku's body felt wrong as well. He felt like his skin was too small. His stomach turned. He quickly gets up and heads to the bathroom and throws up the contents of his stomach. He shivers harshly and heaves again. Tears roll down his face and he tries to breathe. He was so hot and sweaty. Izuku pushes himself up on weak legs and stumbles into the shower. He turns the water on to cold. He didn't care if he had his clothes on or not. He slides down the wall and lets the water run down his body and soak into his clothes. He closes his eyes and tries to relax as another shiver runs through his body. Izuku jolts awake to someone slamming the bathroom door open. The shower was still on and he was shivering. "Get up," Dad demands. Izuku forces himself to his feet. Dad grabs his wrist and drags him towards the medical room. Izuku really doesn't want to go in there. He tries to pull away and get out of his dad's grasp but he was too weak. "Oh, stop struggling. This is going to happen either way. Even if you got away from me I'd just get Seiki in here to help me," Dad grumbles. He picks Izuku up by his wrist and drops him onto the table. "Hey, bud, it's good to see you again. It's been a while since our last." Seiki pauses as he tries to think of a word. "Visit." A sickening smile makes its way onto his face. Tears well in Izuku's eyes and he starts to sob. "Oh, don't be like that, baby," Seiki coos. Seiki caresses Izuku's cheek then grabs his chin and makes him look into his eyes. "Now isn't that better, baby?" Seiki soothes. Izuku relaxes onto the table and melts into Seiki's hold. Seiki smiles a sweet smile. He was so kind helping Izuku like this. Izuku couldn't even remember why he was crying but he knew Seiki made it go away. Seiki starts to pet his hair and Izuku closes his eyes and leans into it. The pain creeps in slowly this time. Izuku's eyes close from the pain and all the bad things slam back into him. He tries to squirm away from Seiki's touch and from the pain. His arms and legs are strapped down though. Izuku starts to thrash and tries to pull out of the straps. He feels a pop in his wrist and one of his arms is free but it hurts. All of him hurts. Another needle suddenly gets inserted into his neck and Izuku tries to grab the needle but his arm gets held down. He whines harshly. After a little bit everything starts to fade. Izuku wakes up on his futon with a pounding headache. He rolls off of the mattress and tries to get up. He can barely push himself up into a crawling position. He has a brace on his wrist, he notices. He wondered what he accidentally did to himself. Izuku's stomach turns. He tries to stand up or move. He gets just to the bathroom door before he throws up. He managed to not get anything on him but it was still a mess. It also smelled horrible. Tears streamed down his face. He wanted Mama. He didn't want to be in this room anymore. He wanted to go home. "As I always say, please let me know if I miss any." Izuku hums as he rocks back and forth in his shower. He didn't want to go back out into his room. They were watching him and he knew they were. He saw what was behind the blanket. He didn't want them to watch him. He didn't want Seiki to see him anymore. He didn't deserve to. No one did. Only him. Izuku's eyes start to close and he jolts up. He couldn't fall asleep. They could do something to him while he was asleep and it wasn't safe in here. If he was awake he could see everything that happened and make sure that no one did anything to him without him knowing. He had to stay awake. Izuku wakes up in a box. He quickly scrambles to a corner of the box and shoves himself into it. The whole thing was shaking and rumbling. It felt like no matter what he did he was unsteady, like he couldn't stay balanced. He lays down on the floor to try and get more stable. A jolt rocks through the whole box and he lifts off the floor slightly and gets slid forward slightly. Izuku slides himself back into the corner. He starts to brace himself better as his journey continues. He didn't understand why he would be put in here or what was happening. He didn't like it. He wanted to be back in the safety of his bathroom. The motion of the box suddenly halts to a stop and he gets shoved into the wall. He hears a bunch of loud noises and movement coming from outside his box. 2 loud slaps come from the wall of the box and Izuku flinches away from it. Laughter and voices start to sound from outside. He hears a bunch of clicks coming from the wall opposite of him. He squeezes himself as close as he can into his corner and stares at the wall. He notices now that there was a crack through the middle of it and he can faintly see light coming through. The wall across from him suddenly opens up and Izuku has to squint at the harsh light that invades the box. Oh shit, he's awake. You got the trank on you still, Hayato? The person who opened the door asks. Oh yeah, I got you, presumably Hayato says, and suddenly a gun is pointed at him. Izuku's eyes widen and he tries to get away, but it was too late. Izuku comes to on something green and itchy. He sneezes when some of it goes up his nose. He blinks a couple of times and looks around. He was surrounded by giant trees and rocks. He was outside. He was out of the facility. But why was he left out here? Did he do something wrong? Did they not need him anymore? Tears well in Izuku's eyes and he quickly closes them and rubs the tears away. He didn't need Seiki. He didn't need them. He was free, he didn't have to do any more experiments. He could do whatever he wanted to. He needed to find a way to survive out here first though. He'll start with shelter and then move on to food and water. He could do this. He just had to follow his gut instincts and he was sure he would be fine. Izuku curls himself into a tight ball in the abandoned burrow that he found. He had thoroughly sniffed around to make sure that no one was going to be coming back to try and kick him out before he decided to make it his home. He still hadn't found anything to eat, but there was a river nearby that he drank some water from. He hoped that it was safe to drink. He didn't really have any other choice and it seemed clean enough to him. So far he could say that this was much better than where he was before. He enjoyed this much more and felt so much safer now that he could choose where to stay. He could choose who got close to him. He was finally content after so long. He didn't even know how old he was. He didn't think it really mattered, but it still felt weird. Birthdays were a big thing in his household. Well, he wasn't there anymore, so it didn't matter. Izuku sighs and closes his eyes as the sky darkens. He would have to go look for food again soon. He was starting to get really hungry. Maybe the darkness would make it harder to see him and bring out some more animals for him to find. Izuku wasn't sure. Izuku makes his way through the forest in search of something to eat. He pauses when he hears something. He quickly looks around and tries to sniff it out. He needed to figure out if it was predator or prey. He hoped it was prey. Izuku's eyes lock onto a large deer and he freezes. Too big for him to take down. A shame really. Izuku huffs and continues on his way. He pauses at a bush and sniffs. It smelled faintly of deer and other things. He finds some berries on them and deems them safe since the deer had obviously eaten them. He takes a bunch of them and eats a few. Izuku's eyes widen and he shoves the rest of them into his mouth and quickly grabs some more. He eats until he's full, then grabs the rest of them. He makes his way back towards his den and finds a good spot and digs a hole. He buries the rest of the berries there for later. He'll try and find another source of food later. He at least has the stash of berries in case he can't find anything else. He's hoping he can find himself some meat to eat. As good as the berries were, he was hoping for something more savory. There was a deep craving in his body for something warm. Something that was once alive. Something that he caught himself. For now though, Izuku would rest. He takes the rest of the trek back to his den and crawls down into the den. He curls up and gets himself comfortable before going to sleep. Izuku wakes up and for once he actually feels rested. He doesn't feel like he needs to hide or be afraid. He can just be. He can do what he wants when he wants. Maybe being abandoned out here in the woods was good for him. Even if he wasn't being useful, he was happy. This was being happy, right? Izuku didn't know. He felt nice and content. He liked being able to choose what he did and when he did it. He wasn't useful though. He wanted to be useful. He was useful back with father. He was in pain and had to be with that man that was supposed to be his caretaker, but he was helping with something. He was useful. Tears stream down Izuku's face and he lifts his hand to try and rub the tears away. He didn't know what to do. He could do anything. There was too much to choose from. He wanted to go back. He didn't want freedom anymore. It felt wrong. It wasn't normal. Izuku's stomach growls and he flinches. He should probably go eat something, but he almost didn't want to. He should probably dig up his berries. He didn't think he could go out and hunt something right now. Izuku takes a deep breath and lets it out slowly. He could do this. He could. He wanted this for so long. He just had to get up and do it. Yeah, he could do this. Izuku couldn't do this. He scrambles up a tree away from a bear. He was hoping it wouldn't climb up after. He doesn't think he could fight off a bear. He was pretty sure it was a bear at least. The bear makes a gruff noise and stalks off. Izuku releases his breath but doesn't leave his spot in the tree. The bear might come back if he came down from his spot. Izuku wanted to go back. He wanted to go home. He would even accept being with Seiki again. He would do anything. He would even do all the inappropriate things that Seiki wanted to do with him. He just wanted to be somewhere familiar. Do something he knew, even if it was painful and horrible and gross. He wanted to be useful. Izuku gets woken up by someone laying down next to him. He quickly sits up and tries to get away. The person grabs his wrist and stops him before he can do anything. Oh, don't be like that, baby. I haven't seen you for 3 days. How was your trip outside? I hope it was everything you were hoping for, Seiki sighed. Izuku stares at Seiki with wide eyes. He was back, but at least he knew it wasn't a dream. He didn't know if he really wanted to be here like he thought the other day. Especially with Seiki being in bed with him. He wanted to get away from him, but Seiki was still holding onto his wrist. Seiki pouts when Izuku doesn't say anything to him. Come on, you must have missed me as much as I missed you, right, baby? Seiki purrs. His other hand comes up to rest on Izuku's thigh. Izuku wanted to throw up. He wanted out. Izuku sees Seiki start to lift his head to look into Izuku's eye. Izuku quickly squeezes his eyes shut. If he had no way to get out of this, he at least wanted to be present for it. He didn't want Seiki to make him think that everything was fine. This wasn't fine. This is going to be so good for you, baby. Don't you worry, Seiki sighs. Izuku didn't think this was going to be very good, but he didn't think he had a choice. Izuku stumbles into the bathroom and collapses into the shower. He throws up everything that was in his stomach. Everything hurt and he felt disgusting. Seiki had ruined him. He had defiled his body and ruined it. Seiki ruined everything. Izuku sobs and heaves again. He wished he was back outside. He thought he hated it, but he was wrong. Maybe he wasn't, though. Maybe this was better for him. He was useful, though. He was useful to Seiki in some way. He was useful to father and other people that he was helping with his studies. Izuku lets out another sob and forces himself up to turn the shower on. He just had to scrub his skin off and then maybe he would be clean of Seiki at least. He needed to be clean again and then he could be useful again. Izuku, baby, are you in there? A feminine voice calls from outside his bathroom. Mama. Izuku jumps up from the corner of the bathroom and opens the door. Mama smiles at him and opens up her arms. Izuku tumbles into them and starts sobbing. Mama starts to gently card her fingers through his long hair. You need a haircut, Mama mentions quietly. Izuku hiccups. He didn't think that that was very important right now. He was just glad to see Mama again. He didn't know how long it had been since he had seen her. I have something for you, baby. It's a birthday present just for you, Mama hums. Izuku pulls back and looks at her through blurry eyes. She holds out the thing that she had apparently been holding. It was a red fox stuffed animal. I thought it was fitting since it's the animal DNA that you've been assigned. I thought since I've just seen you now that it would be a good idea to give you a haircut as well, Mama beams. Izuku nods his head in agreement. Izuku hadn't looked at himself in a mirror in a while, so he didn't know how long his hair had gotten. It did keep falling into his face. Maybe a haircut would be a nice change. Sit on the counter. I'll help you up if you want, Mama soothes. Izuku feels his face heat up and sheepishly nods his head. Mama lifts him up onto the counter and Izuku gets comfortable. Izuku looks at himself in the mirror and sees that his hair was a huge mess and was down to his shoulders. He also noticed that his hair had started to grow a bright orange-red color. Like a true red fox. It seems that the DNA that was apparently being injected into him was really affecting him. Wait, Mama had said it was his birthday, didn't she? Maybe she knew how old he was. Izuku swallows harshly and takes a deep breath as Mama starts to cut his hair. What birthday is this for me? Izuku mumbles. His voice was hoarse and it hurt to talk. He didn't realize how long it was since he had talked until now. Mama makes a choked noise. Well, Mama trails off. Izuku didn't like the sound of this right now. It's your 10th birthday, darling, Mama says hesitantly. Izuku squeezes the stuffed animal tightly in his arms. That was fine. He was fine. He was just a lot older than he thought. So much time had passed. It didn't feel like that long. How did he lose so much time? He had been here for 5 years, but it only felt like maybe a year. Izuku could deal with this. He just needed to stay calm. Maybe he just didn't need to remember those years. Yeah, they were just unimportant. Yeah, that was it. He just didn't need those memories. Alright baby, that must feel so much better, huh? Mama says as she runs her hand through his curls. Izuku nods his head and squeezes the stuffed animal to his face. He takes a deep breath in and realizes it smells like Mama. Perfect. I've gotta go, baby, but I'll try to visit more often. I've just been super busy with helping the other kids here. They aren't as well behaved as you are. I'll for sure see you for your next birthday though. Look forward to that, Mama comforts. Izuku nods his head and leans back into her. Mama hugs him tight to her chest and kisses the back of his head. Stay safe, she whispers. Izuku shoves his blankets underneath his sink. He moves them around until he is happy with their placement and pushes himself into the cupboard. He closes the door and finally relaxes. It felt like he was back in his den outside. He felt somewhat safe. Seiki, what did we talk about? Father growled outside his door. Izuku flinches and hits his head on the top of the cabinet. Oh come on doctor, I just wanted to relieve a little stress. You know how I get when I'm pent up, Seiki drawls. Izuku squeezes himself tighter in his resting spot. He feels around and finds the plush that Mama gave him. I know, but you need to find someone else to F-. We decided that this subject needed to have some sort of safe space or it would cause more issues than not. So leave it be, Father snaps. Izuku whimpers and he starts to shake. He really hopes that Seiki will leave him be. He couldn't do it today. Forever. Fine. What about getting him food? Seiki asks and his voice starts to fade away. Izuku thinks he hears Father say something back, but he's too far away. A loud slam sounds and Izuku knows that his door is now closed and locked again. Izuku lets out a relieved sigh and relaxes into his blankets. Seiki was gone. Izuku could relax now. Maybe. Izuku wakes up to the sound of a blaring sound. He covers his ears and tries to block out the sound. It was too loud. He pushes himself further into his den, trying to escape the sound. He couldn't escape it though. It was everywhere. Someone grabs his arm and Izuku's eyes snap open. Mama. She takes Izuku into her arms and takes him out of his safe space. Wait, he couldn't leave his stuffed animal. Izuku squirms and tries to get out of Mama's arms to try and grab it. We have to go, baby, Mama soothes. Izuku shakes his head and manages to get to the ground and quickly grabs his plush. Oh, I see. Come on, baby, I'll carry you out. I can go a lot faster than you can right now, Mama explains. Izuku nods his head and holds his arms out. Mama lifts him up and takes them out of his room. He didn't understand what was going on. Everything was so loud and confusing. The lights felt too bright and too much. Mama starts to make soft shushing noises and slowly petting his hair. Izuku shoves his head into Mama's shoulder. Izuku sees a bunch of other people being taken out of their rooms and all being moved in the same direction he was going. Izuku can hear shouting and a bunch of loud slams. Screaming sounds as well, and Izuku flinches. He didn't understand what was going on. Mama shoves open a door and Izuku gets put into the back of a vehicle with a bunch of other people. Some seem to be his age. Possibly. Izuku wasn't sure what made him look like he was his age or not. They were his height at least. Stay safe. I'll see you once we get to the new location, Mama says and brushes his bangs back. Izuku squeezes his plush tighter to his chest and the back of the van is slammed shut. The vehicle lurches to a start and everyone gets shoved together. Izuku flinches and tries to get away from the things touching him. They were all packed tightly together and he couldn't get away. He didn't want to be near these other people. He didn't like it. Izuku can hear sirens coming from outside of the vehicle. A sudden lurch comes through the vehicle and Izuku slams his head into the wall. Izuku stumbles in between two buildings and tries not to collapse. His entire body hurt and his lungs were screaming at him. He pulled in a stuttered breath and tried not to throw everything that was left in his stomach up. He could do this, he just needed to find somewhere safe. Izuku feels a slight twinge in his thigh and looks down at the skin. There was a deep scar there, but it almost looked like Izuku could see something underneath it. Something was under his skin and Izuku needed it out. Izuku finds a sharp object from the alley that he was in and takes it to his skin. It was covered in dirt and grime and would probably cause an infection, but Izuku couldn't care about that right now. He just needed the thing in his leg out. Izuku pushes hard on his scar and tears well in his eyes. He bites his lip and tries not to make a sound. He cuts deep into his skin and hits something. He pulls his sharp object out of his skin and drops it to the ground next to him. His hands were shaking and it was even harder to breathe. His hair was plastered to his forehead from sweat. Izuku takes as deep a breath as he can and shoves his fingers into the cut. He digs around until he finds the thing he was looking for and grips onto it and pulls it out. It was a small capsule that had a blinking light on it. What could it even be? Why would father put this in him? A tracker? Izuku quickly drops the capsule and pushes himself off the wall. His thigh was screaming at him now more than ever. He had to get away from the tracker. He was exhausted, but he had to keep going. Izuku stumbles out onto the sidewalk and starts to walk. He wanted to run, but he didn't think he could even if he tried. He looks around and notices that people are starting to actually come out onto the street. Good, he could blend in better. Hopefully. Izuku hears someone shout something and he flinches and pushes himself closer to the wall but keeps moving. It was so loud and bright here. He didn't know how to react to anything. It was all so much. Too much. Izuku closes his eyes and tries to take deep breaths as he continues to stumble down the street. Someone touches his shoulder and Izuku flinches and all but slams himself into the wall of a building. "Whoa, you okay there, kid? You look a little out of it," the person who presumably touched him asks. Izuku opens his eyes and forces them to focus on the person who was talking to him. Izuku didn't recognize the person in front of him, but he didn't really think that mattered. There were probably so many people who were helping father. Izuku couldn't take risks. The person in front of Izuku looked so concerned though. He didn't think he could talk right now though. "Kid," the person finally speaks again and Izuku flinches again. He had to go. Izuku bolts. Izuku sniffs around the alley that he found. He could mostly just smell the stench of the garbage around him, but he was trying to find the stuff under it. He wanted to make sure this was a safe space. Just for tonight. Izuku really needed to keep moving. The further away from father and the tracker, the better. He was just so tired now, he couldn't keep going. If he did, he would probably pass out from exhaustion in the middle of the road, which definitely wasn't safe. Izuku crouches down and takes a deep sniff, trying not to GG on the rotten things. He catches a whiff of something savory. Maybe it was something edible. He gets closer to the garbage pile and shuffles through the things before he gets closer to the smell. He finds a dead rat underneath the bags. Izuku picks it up and continues to sniff around it. It seemed to die by being crushed under the bags, but Izuku had to be safe. He didn't know what the rat had eaten and if it had been poisoned, and that wouldn't be good for Izuku either. Izuku deems it fine and digs in. "What the F dash?" a deep voice mutters from the mouth of the alley. Izuku flinches back and pulls his meal close to his chest and bares his teeth at the person. He wasn't going to lose his meal. He could fight off whoever it was even if he was exhausted, hopefully. Izuku looks up at the stranger and all Izuku can see is the person's tall, lanky frame. "Kid, are you eating a rat?" the person asks hesitantly. Izuku analyzes that this isn't the person before, but he didn't think that mattered very much right now. Izuku huffs and crawls a little further away from the person and deeper into the alley. He didn't trust this person. He didn't trust anyone really, but especially not now. "Look, I'm not here to hurt you, okay? I just saw you limp into this alley and you looked pretty injured and I wanted to make sure you were okay. I can help patch you up," the stranger admits. Izuku frowns and eyes the stranger again. If this person really did help him, it would get him moving faster and maybe his wounds wouldn't get infected, but this person could also hurt him. Make him do things. Like Seiki. Being nice at first didn't always mean that they were going to be nice once they got him all alone. Here, how about this? I'm going to go grab my first aid kit and get you an actual meal. You can leave during that time, but if you want my help, stay and I can help you here, alright? The person explains. They sounded almost desperate. Izuku just stares. The person sighs and then sets off. Izuku waits for the person to come back and attack him, but when he doesn't, Izuku goes back to his meal. Having to hold it for so long got blood all over his clothes. He was already dirty, but this just made it worse. Izuku huffs and licks his hands to try and clean up some of the blood. It didn't do much, but it made his hands feel less sticky. After finishing his rat, Izuku quickly discards it and weighs his options again. After having eaten something, he was feeling better and would probably be able to fight this stranger off if they attacked him. If they didn't attack him, though, he could get more food and heal his wounds. His adrenaline was also starting to come down, so it would be much harder to leave without threat than with one. Izuku leans his head against the wall he was leaning on and rests his eyes. He was so tired he wasn't safe enough to sleep yet. He sighs and pinches his arm to keep himself awake. He opens his eyes and blinks sluggishly. Maybe he should stand up. Izuku pushes himself slightly off of the wall before his hands slip and he drops back against the wall. Maybe a little nap would be alright. Izuku jolts awake and falls off of the thing he was on. He WHPs his head around and sees he's in some kind of building. He touches the thing that he was on and it was soft and cushiony. It looked kinda gross but comfortable. Oh, you're up, stranger voices. Izuku WHPs his head around to look at where the voices comes from and goes to get away. The stranger from earlier was standing in the hallway in just a towel. They had dark burns all across his chest and face. Izuku didn't like that they were only in a towel. He didn't want to do anything for him. Izuku swallows hard and creeps slowly away from the stranger. Whoa, hey, I'm not going to hurt you, and the way you're moving you're going to pop your stitches, the stranger urges. They step closer to Izuku and he bares his teeth. The stranger stops moving and puts their hands up. They slowly crouch down so that they are both sitting at the same height. Izuku relaxes slightly but doesn't take his eyes off the person. The person moves to sit crisscross but makes sure that their towel is still covering themselves and they put their hands on their knees. Izuku relaxes a little more and sits down. The stranger gives him a hesitant smile. Alright, now that we've both calmed down a little bit, my name is Dabi and you're at my place. I was going to let you stay in the alley where I found you, but it was so dirty and I realized I didn't have enough supplies to help you there. The only thing I've done so far was stitch up the gash on your leg. I have a shower here if you would like to use it, and some spare clothes. I can also fix you up a meal, Dabi explains slowly. Izuku eyes Dabi up and down again. They seemed a little weak, sickly even. There was muscle there though. Hidden behind a lanky figure. Still dangerous but not a threat at the moment. Shower, Izuku finally rasps out. Dabi smiles and nods. Alright, I'm going to stand up and you can follow me so I can show you where it is, okay? Dabi voices. Izuku hums and watches him stand. He gets up himself and follows a little bit behind him. Dabi stops at a half-open door and awkwardly points at it. He clears his throat and looks to the side. Well, this is the bathroom. You can use my soaps and stuff. I'm going to go grab you some spare clothes and I'll leave them outside the door, Dabi mumbles. Izuku watches them leave and then slinks into the bathroom and shuts the door. He finds a lock on the handle and suches it. He had never had a lock on his bathroom before. It was nice. Gave him more privacy. Gave him control. Izuku strips down and figures out how to turn the shower on, then steps underneath the water. All the tension leaves his muscles and he leans his head against the wall of the shower. It had been so long since he was able to clean himself. He had gotten so dirty. Izuku turns his head and then finds the soap. He takes it hesitantly and smells it. It didn't smell horrible. It wasn't his favorite smell, but it wasn't horrible either. It would have to do either way anyways. He would rather smell a little funny than be covered in grime and blood. Izuku scrubs his skin until it's red. It still felt like he had things on his skin, hands on his skin. Izuku closes his eyes and takes a deep breath but keeps scrubbing. He needed to get it off. He wasn't sure what it was, but he was sure that it was there. Maybe it was his skin, maybe that was the problem. A knock sounds at the door and Izuku flinches and looks up. The handle doesn't move and he relaxes. Hey, I left the clothes out for you a little bit ago, but I just wanted to let you know that I made you something to eat. I'm eating too, so it won't just be you, Dabi mentions. Izuku blinks a couple of times and listens to Dabi's footsteps head back in the direction of where he woke up. He looks down at his arm and sees deep red welts. He presses a hand to them and winces at the sting. He should probably get out of the shower now, especially since Dabi did say they had food for him. Izuku fumbles with the shower handle before getting the water to shut off and steps out. He looks around and spots a towel next to the sink on the counter and uses it to dry off. He unlocks the door slowly and listens for any breathing outside the door before opening it up a crack. He doesn't see Dabi anywhere, but he spots the clothes on the floor and grabs them. Izuku slams the door shut and quickly locks it. He holds his breath and waits to hear footsteps or some sort of sign that Dabi was upset with him or going to do something to him. When he hears nothing, he checks his clothes for anything and sniffs them. He only smells rich smoke and a hint of something else. It just smells like Dabi. Izuku relaxes and quickly dresses before staring at the door. Did he really want to leave the safety of the bathroom? Dabi seemed to be safe enough so far, but still Izuku wasn't sure. He was still hungry though, and he still had quite a few injuries, and Dabi did say that they would help him with them. Izuku flicks the lock and steps out of the bathroom. He sniffs around and gets hit with a strong smell of something savory. He follows it into where he woke up and sees Dabi stand in the room adjacent to where Izuku was. They were moving their hands around and seemed to be doing something. Izuku pads towards them slowly, keeping himself small and quiet. He makes it to behind Dabi's right side and looks over at what they were doing. They had a pan and were cooking up some food. So they weren't lying to him when they said that there was food for Izuku. Izuku tilts his head and tries to figure out what they could be cooking. It smelled good, but he wanted to know what exactly it was and what was in it. Izuku didn't want to talk right now though. Maybe Dabi would tell him when it was done. Suddenly Dabi flinches away from him and Izuku pushes himself against the wall and crouches down. Dabi stares at him with wide eyes and seems to be a little shaky. Sorry, I didn't hear you, sorry. The food is ready, you can just go sit at the table and I'll dish you a serving, Dabi explains. Izuku blinks a couple of times before following their instructions and sitting down on a chair by the table. Izuku doesn't have to wait long before a bowl of food is placed in front of him. It's not the best meal, but I did the best with what I had, Dabi explains quietly. Izuku sniffs the food again and deems it still worthy. Izuku hesitantly takes a bite. It wasn't the best thing he had, but it definitely wasn't the worst. Rats were still one of the highest on the list of tastiest foods. They eat in an awkward silence and Izuku shifts uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't want to stay in one place for too long, but Dabi was being quite nice. He'll just wait until they go to sleep and then he'll head out and try to figure out another place to stay. Izuku just wanted to set up more dens. This could perhaps be one. Izuku would have to find out. Izuku listens and waits for sound to come from Dabi's room. All Izuku can hear is deep breaths, most likely coming from them sleeping. That was what Izuku hoped it was, at least. He creeps away from the door and towards the window that he saw had a little balcony thing. Izuku carefully pushes the window open enough that he can squeeze himself through and out. He tumbles down onto the metal landing and pushes himself up. Izuku takes in his surroundings. He looked to be up 2 floors and was in an alley. He couldn't find any other landmarks, but that didn't matter too much right now. Once Izuku left his spot, he was sure he would be able to make it back here. There might be more of a visual outside of the alley as well. He would just have to find out. Izuku shakes his arms and makes his way down the metal stairs. He stops when the stairs stop. It was still quite a ways from the ground. Why would they stop the stairs before they got to the ground? He saw a ladder, but it was locked. These stairs and ladder really did not do their job very well. Izuku would probably be fine if he jumped down though, hopefully. He shimmies himself through the bars and drops himself down onto the ground. He crouches down as soon as his feet hit the ground to try and not break his legs. It would not be good if he broke his legs. The stitches in his leg pull from his movements and Izuku frowns. They were going to be a problem. He needed them to stay in his leg. He knew that, but it would be worse if they broke. He'd just have to try and be careful. Izuku stands and stretches out his arms and back, then heads out for the street again. The sun was almost up, so there were probably going to be more people, but he could deal with that. I mean, he dealt with all the others when he was shoved into the vehicle. He could so deal with walking in a crowded city. Izuku closes his eyes tightly as he shoves himself against the wall of an alley. It was too much, too much. He couldn't do it. He really thought he could. He had to blend in. He had to be able to do this or else father would catch him. Izuku's breathing picks up and his hands start to shake. He was fine. It was just some people. But those people could do anything to him. They could have been sent to find him. A whine is ripped from Izuku's throat and he slides down the wall to sit on the ground. He couldn't be like this. He had to get out of his own head. He lifts a hand to his mouth and bites down hard. His teeth sink into his hand and he flinches back and hits his head against the wall. Izuku takes a deep breath and releases his hand from his mouth. He opens his eyes and looks around. There was no one around him and nothing was happening. It was just him in the alley. He was okay. Izuku looks down at his hand to assess the damage that he did to himself. He had 2 puncture wounds where his canines had sunk into his hand, but otherwise he was okay. He wasn't even bleeding that much. He was okay. He just had to get moving again. He shoves himself up with the help of the wall and looks back out onto the street. People were quickly walking past the alley without even glancing in. Izuku wasn't sure if he could throw himself back out into the street, but maybe he didn't have to. Izuku looks down the alley, but it was a dead end. There had to be another way. He could always wait until night, but that was a lot of time wasted just sitting around. He wanted to keep moving. He didn't want to get caught. Then Izuku looks up. Izuku sits at the edge of a building looking down at all of the people below him. It was so much easier to get places when you just went on top of the roofs of buildings. It was also fun to watch people. He had never seen this many people all in one place before, or this many people in general. Maybe he had seen this amount of people before he was in the facility, but he didn't remember that time very well. It was all kind of fuzzy, like someone had thrown a blanket over his memories. It was that way even with his time in the facility. He could pick out some little moments, but most of it was just not there. Izuku wasn't sure if that was normal or not. Izuku leans his head against the railing and goes back to lazily watching the people below him. He should probably keep looking for a place to set up another den, but he was tired. He didn't feel unsafe up here, but also not the safest. A little rest would be fine, he was sure of it. He gets himself more comfortable and more secure in his spot and closes his eyes. He wasn't going to sleep, really. He was just going to rest his eyes for a little bit. Izuku takes a deep breath and blinks a couple of times before rubbing his eyes. He looks around and sees that the sun had fallen quite a bit since he had first stopped here. He frowns and pushes himself up. He really wasn't trying to fall asleep, but it was quite comfy up on the roof. Nice and warm, and he could feel the sun on his skin. That was a really weird feeling that Izuku didn't know if he would ever get used to feeling it. He wasn't sure if he wanted to get used to it. It was fun having it be a new experience. A little odd. He stretches his arms out above his head and sighs when some of his joints pop. He pushes his hair out of his eyes so he can see where he was going and heads off. He wanted his dens to be somewhat close to each other so it was easy for him to travel between them, but he also didn't want them directly next to each other. That wouldn't be safe after all. He still wasn't sure what he exactly wanted for his dens, but he was sure he would know what it was when he saw the spot. Izuku hums as he sorts through the things that he had found while walking about. He was sitting in his second favorite den out of the 4 that he had. His favorite was with Dabi, but he hadn't gone back to their place since they had first taken him in and helped him, but Izuku still knew it was his favorite. This one was his second favorite because of how secluded it was while still having people nearby. It was the second story of a building that wasn't used. He had made himself a little corner full of all the fun things he finds or he's given. The floor below him was used as a bar or club thing, but it was easy for Izuku to sneak in and go up the stairs. He could also just scale the wall, but that took a lot of energy that he sometimes didn't have. He really needed to make an easier way for him to get up. Izuku turns his attention back to his pile that he just got. He might need to move some of them to some of his other dens. He really needed to get stuff into Dabi's place, but he was nervous and worried about how Dabi would react to him coming back out of the blue. He'd have to do it eventually though if he wanted to keep that den and safe space. Izuku digs through his bag of items and tries to find the things he wants to keep here and what he wants to be in other spots or to stay with him. He keeps his plush with him everywhere he goes and some food. He takes out the new shiny thing he found on one of the roofs he uses to move and puts it in its place. He continues in that same matter and gets things where he wants them. Izuku pauses when he hears someone climbing the stairs up to his area. People normally didn't do that, so it was weird that someone was. His den wasn't very obvious or colorful. It was hidden in a small alcove that you couldn't see unless you were basically directly in front of it, but that didn't mean Izuku wasn't worried about being found. He quickly zips his bag up and slinks out as he hears voices start to fill the empty space of the floor he was on. He finds the window he comes through when he climbs the wall and makes his way down to the street. He didn't like that people were encroaching on his space, but he wasn't sure what he could do about it. He would try to chase them out or fight, but he wasn't sure if he would be strong enough to beat them or how many people there were. He also didn't want to expose his den. His dens were his safe space and he needed to keep it safe. Izuku shakes out his hair and it falls into his eyes. He huffs and pushes it out of his eyes. He wanted it out of his face, but he hated the way it felt when he tucked it behind his ears. He was too scared to cut his hair as well. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to cut it shorter. He kinda liked the length it was at. Izuku heads out onto the sidewalk and blends in with the night crowd. He still didn't like being in such close proximity to people, but he needed to get 2 alleys down where there was a fire escape that he could climb to get onto the roof. He could scale the buildings, but that was too much work and he still wasn't confident in his skill to be able to do it without falling. He makes it to the alley and clambers up the fire escape and up onto the rooftops. He wasn't quite sure where he was going to go. He just knew he wanted to get away from the den he was just in. He was pretty sure that those people weren't up there for him, but he would rather be safe than dead. He could go to one of his food stashes or find new trinkets. He'd just have to travel around for a little bit before he decided what he wanted to do. Izuku freezes in the dumpster that he was currently rummaging through. He always found the best trash. He wasn't sure why people would want to throw away perfectly good clothes and blankets and other shiny things. It was good for Izuku though. It gave him a bunch of chances to get fun trinkets. Izuku flinches when the voices currently outside his dumpster in the alley get louder. He wasn't sure what they were saying, but he didn't think that he wanted to know. Then Izuku recognizes one of the voices. Dabi. He slowly peeks his head up over the edge of the dumpster and sees a lanky person standing over Dabi who was sitting on the ground with blood running down their face from multiple places. Izuku frowns and looks back to the lanky person. They held a knife and were threateningly swinging it around it, moving it concerningly close to Dabi's face. Neither of the people seemed to notice Izuku hidden in his dumpster, so he took the chance to slink out of it and onto the ground. It was just like when he was hunting his prey. He kept himself close to the ground and quiet. He couldn't let this person know he was there until it was already too late for the person. Izuku makes it until he could actually reach out and touch the person if he really stretched his arm out. Dabi finally spots Izuku and their eyes widen in shock and maybe fear, but Izuku wasn't worried at all. He was confident that he could take this person out, just like the rats. Izuku turns his focus pack to the person and they haven't noticed him even with Dabi's attention on him. He tenses his back legs up and sits up onto the ball of his feet. He focuses on the knife. He needed to take the person's ability to fight back first before he could incapacitate them. Izuku pounces and the pressure of him slamming into the person's arm takes them completely to the ground. Izuku quickly snatches the knife and then moves his face back towards the person's neck. Izuku quickly surges forward and bites down hard on the person's neck. Dabi suddenly makes a shocked noise and shifts forward. "Let's not kill them now, kid," Dabi wheezes out. Izuku looks up at them and slowly unlocks his jaw. Dabi sighs and relaxes back against the wall. "It's good to see you, kid. I'm glad you're not dead," Dabi mumbles before promptly passing out. Izuku freezes for half a second before he rushes forward to Dabi. He didn't know them well, but they were the nicest person that Izuku had ever met before, so he didn't want to lose them. He had to get them back to one of his dens, and thankfully the closest one to them was Dabi's place, and Izuku knew Dabi had medical supplies. Izuku stands up and grabs Dabi's arms gently and wraps them around his neck before grabbing Dabi's thighs. He heaves Dabi up and into his arms. He stumbles a little bit before getting his ground and starts to walk. He has to walk frustratingly slow with Dabi in his arms, and he was pretty sure that Dabi's feet were still brushing against the ground. He lets out a breath and keeps going. He wasn't sure how he was going to get them up the fire escape. He would solve that problem when he got to it. Izuku huffs as he drags Dabi's unconscious body through their window. It was far too difficult to get Dabi up the side of the building, even with the fire escape. Izuku was sure that there was an easier way to get to Dabi's place, but he didn't know it. Izuku gets his arms underneath Dabi's torsos and legs and barely manages to heave them up into a tight hold. He stumbles over to Dabi's couch and drops them onto it. Izuku collapses to the floor himself and just lays there for a minute. He had to get up to treat Dabi's wounds, but his arms and legs felt like putty. Maybe he should work on his strength, especially since he scaled walls so often, or tried to at least. Izuku sighs and pushes himself onto his side, then up on shaky legs. He stumbles to the bathroom and looks under the sink and finds the first aid kit. He wasn't sure how well he would be able to treat Dabi's wounds, but he remembers a little bit from his own wounds being treated, so he could at least try his best. Something was better than nothing. He grabs the kit and stumbles back to where he dropped Dabi off and plops down in front of them. Dabi didn't look too bad, which was a good sign. Maybe they had just overexerted themselves or something. Or it was something on the inside of their body. Izuku couldn't do anything about inside wounds. He really hoped it wasn't something on the inside. Izuku wakes with a jolt when he hears someone groan. He quickly looks around to assess who it was and where he was. He relaxes when he remembers what happened and where he was. He looks up at Dabi and their face was pulled into a grimace, but they didn't seem to be awake. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Izuku had bad dreams too. It could also be that Dabi was in a lot of pain, but Izuku really hoped it wasn't that. He wasn't quite sure what he could do about that, and he wanted to keep Dabi comfortable, especially while they were still healing from their wounds. Izuku flinches when Dabi makes another low sound. He flicks his eyes back over to him and he noticed that sweat was building on their forehead. Izuku frowns and stands up on shaky legs to look around the place to find something cool to try and help Dabi. They must just be super hot. Izuku always felt hot, but Dabi's place didn't seem too horribly hot, but maybe they just felt temperatures differently. Izuku hums as he rummages around in drawers and closets and finds a rag. He makes his way into Dabi's kitchen and turns on the sink to cold and drenches the rag in water when he deems it cold enough. Izuku wrings the rag out and heads back to the couch where Dabi was laying. They had moved from where they were originally and seemed to have been thrashing. Izuku frowns but then gently places the cloth on Dabi's forehead, and that seems to help for a few seconds until they jolt up and almost smack Izuku in the face. Izuku huffs. He did all that work for basically nothing and he almost got attacked for it. Dabi's eyes were unfocused and blurry and they frantically looked around the room before landing on Izuku. Their eyes come into focus and they quickly jolt back before groaning in pain. "What the F are you doing here?" Dabi blurts out, staring at Izuku. Izuku blinks a couple times and stares at Dabi in confusion. Izuku swallows harshly and responds quietly. "I didn't want to leave you in an alley out in the open, and I wanted to treat your wounds. I also wanted to make sure you would wake up fine." It felt weird for him to talk. He wasn't even sure when the last time he talked was. The most sound he made was soft humming. Dabi had asked him a question though. Maybe that meant that Izuku could ask one of his own. Izuku shakes his head, "Not now." Dabi scrunches their face up. They open their mouth and then shut it again with a click. They close their eyes and take a deep breath. "Right, okay, I got that part, but why are you around me? I assumed you didn't like me or whatever after you ran from my place and didn't ever show back up," Dabi admits through gritted teeth. Izuku tilts his head and considers the question. He didn't understand what Dabi meant by not showing up around here. He came by all the time to make sure one of his dens wasn't compromised. He even had a stash of his things outside on the fire escape. He just knew that this was Dabi's den first, so he didn't want to intrude all at once. He had to be sneaky about it. "Are you just going to stand there and stare at me or what?" Dabi snaps before suddenly drawing back into themselves. Izuku blinks a couple of times. He didn't think he was silent for that long, and he didn't feel like Dabi desperately needed an answer that second. Izuku hums and licks his lips. I'm not sure what you mean by me not showing up around here again, he admits quietly. Dabi's eyes snap back up and stare at Izuku. They open and close their mouth a couple times. What, this is the first time you've been in my place since I first found you, Dabi sputters out. Izuku's eyebrows lower and he hums again. He had been in their place though. He had been in here multiple times, especially recently. He had started to move his stash into the place so it was safer and actually in a den. I come here all the time, Izuku finally says. Dabi stares at Izuku with their mouth hanging open. They close their eyes and run a hand through their hair before flopping back down onto the couch. I am in way too much pain and way too tired to deal with this right now, they grumble before throwing an arm over their face. Izuku blinks then nods his head and patters off back into the kitchen. He makes it to the sink and opens the cupboard underneath and reaches into the back corner and pulls out one of his stashed snacks. He had put it here recently. He tried not to keep food in here for very long. Last time that happened, Dabi had found one of his stashes and thrown it away. Izuku cups the bird he caught 2 days ago in his hands to not make a mess and digs in. He smiles when he hears the satisfying crunch of bones as he bites down. Small songbirds like this were one of his favorite meals. They were quite hard to catch though, so it was a special treat to get one. Which was exactly why Izuku had stashed it here at Dabi's. Izuku perks up when a thought comes to his mind. He scrambles up, careful not to get any blood on the floor. Dabi didn't like that either. He prances into the living room to find Dabi in the same position. Their breathing indicated that they were awake though. After Izuku stares at them in silence for a little while, Dabi finally lifts their arm and stares at him. What? Dabi snaps and raises an eyebrow. Izuku bristles but decides to continue with his plan. He takes his half-finished bird and pushes it towards Dabi. Dabi quickly jolts up and away from the offered snack. They stare up at Izuku with wide eyes and an open mouth. Izuku furrows his brows and steps closer, trying to convey what he wanted. Why the F? Do you have a dead bird? Where did you get the bird? I know you didn't leave my place, Dabi flounders. Izuku wilts a little bit but was determined. You needed to eat lots of food when you were healing. It's for you to eat. Sorry, I already ate half of it, Izuku explains quietly and slowly. He didn't understand why this was so confusing. It should be a simple concept. Dabi blinks a couple of times and shakes their head. I literally have no idea what to say to you about that. That is, Dabi trails off and closes their eyes and takes a few deep breaths. If you're hungry, just grab something from my fridge. Please do not bring any dead animals into my house, Dabi finally sighs. Izuku quickly averts his eyes. They were not going to be happy if they found the other 3 snacks he had stashed in the place. What's that look for? Dabi presses. Izuku quickly looks at the floor and pulls his bird to his chest. Kid, Dabi growls. Izuku shrinks into himself. Dabi flops back onto the couch and groans. Oh my god, there's more, isn't there? Dabi finally mumbles. Izuku slowly looks up at Dabi from under his lashes and sees them staring at him. He hesitantly nods his head. Dabi pinches their nose and takes another deep breath. Okay, that's fine, just get them out soon and no more. They breathe out before closing their eyes and throwing an arm back over there. Izuku perks back up. He thought he was going to get in a lot more trouble than that. He honestly expected Dabi to lash out and hit him. That's what father would have done to him. That really proved that Dabi was the nicest person that he had ever met. Izuku plops himself down next to the couch and goes about finishing his treat. Another though pops up into his head as he finishes off the bird, and he looks up at Dabi. He tilts his head and bites his lip. Can I ask you a question? Izuku finally speaks up. Dabi sighs. Sure, kid. Izuku perks up and licks his lips. What does "if" mean? Izuku asks, eyes wide. Izuku hums a tune Dabi had played for him earlier today as he rummages through an alley. He pauses when he picks up a noise from deeper in the alley. He looks down the dingy alley trying to pinpoint exactly where the noise had come from. He squeezes himself onto the ground and shimmies over to the wall as he flicks his eyes across the back wall. His eyes lock onto a girl being shoved against a wall with tears in her eyes. A burly hand was pressed onto her mouth, the knuckles white from the grip. Izuku's eyes travel up the arm and land on a man's face. There was a look in his eyes. It was the kind Izuku assumed he had when he looked at a rat he could catch, the exact same look Seiki often looked at him with. Izuku frowns and glances back at the girl. Tears had started to stream down her face and he could hear her whimpering. Izuku's eyes snap back to the man when he hears the tinkling sound of metal. He looks down and sees the man pulling his belt out of his breathes. He caffs the girl flinching in the corner of his eye. He wasn't quite sure what was going on, but he was sure that it was bad, especially if it reminded him of Seiki. Izuku slinks towards the pair as the man fumbles with his breathes. As he went to push down his underwear, Izuku sprung up and slammed into the man's back. The girl gasps as the man stumbles into the wall. After her brief moment of shock, she bolts out of the alley. Izuku gets flung from the man's back into a wall and squeaks as the air is pushed from his lungs. He quickly rights himself on his hands and feet and looks back up at the man with his teeth bared. "What the F is wrong with you, you little brat?" the man exclaims as he W's around to face Izuku. Izuku tenses his thighs, getting ready for the man to make his move. The man's nostrils flare and he charges. Izuku scampers off to the right as the man throws a punch into the ground, right where Izuku used to be perched. He howls in pain as his fist makes contact with the concrete. Izuku's breath comes in quick breaths as he scrambles to find a way out. This maybe wasn't the best idea, but he couldn't just leave the girl. She just looked so afraid, so much like how he used to feel. The man manages to get himself righted and WHPS back around to size Izuku up. Izuku's eyes widen and his legs lock up as the man's face breaks out into a sinister grin. He takes big bounding steps forward and boxes Izuku against the wall with his arms. Izuku struggles to keep himself in the moment as all he can think about is how similar this man is to Seiki. "Since you got rid of my first little prize, I suppose you'll just have to be the replacement," the man growls out. Izuku's heart feels like it's in his throat and he can't get his body to cooperate. The sound of running footsteps causes the man to look back for a second, and Izuku takes that one moment of shock to bite down onto the man's arm. The man jerks away, trying to get out of Izuku's grip, causing his teeth to slip free of his arm and cause a deeper wound. Izuku spits blood from his mouth as more seeps down his chin and scrambles to the lowest wall. He quickly scales the wall just as a couple of people round the corner and turn into the alley. He just catches a glimpse of a navy blue hat and a bright blue sleeve before he pulls himself over the top of the building. He hears some yelling from below, but he pays it no mind as he books it across the roof. He had to get out of here, he had to get home. A flash of blue skitters next to his side and he jolts in the other direction. He stumbles but catches himself and keeps up his escape. "Hey kid, stop," a feminine voice calls out from behind him. Izuku stumbles again but doesn't stop. He can't stop, he can't be caught. He has to keep going. Dabi is waiting for him. Something snags his ankle and he slams into the ground hard. He rolls quickly to his side as an arm slams down where he once was. He locks eyes with a person with electric blue eyes. Their sleeves are in ribbons and swirling around where they stand. Izuku takes in a sharp breath before he shoves himself up and towards the edge of the building. He would jump to the ground if he had to. "Demon it," the person behind him growls. He hears a whoosh from behind his right and he throws himself down to the left. He skids on his elbows and he feels his skin rip, but he quickly gets his feet underneath him and moves. The person in blue makes another exclamation behind him, but Izuku quickly throws himself off the roof. It would be easier to hide in a less open space, more corners to turn. He manages to catch himself on the wall without much injury and stumbles onto the ground and right into the neighboring wall of the alley he just descended into. He shoves himself off it and heads towards the busy streets. He takes a deep breath and shoves himself out into the crowd of people. He tries his best not to shove people and blend in at the crowd. The blood trailing from his mouth and arms didn't help much, but he was sure he could get away. He just had to make it to one of his safe spots and then he could get home to Dabi. He turns a corner and risks a quick glance behind him and barely catches a glimpse of bright blue. He keeps himself moving forward until he finds the alley he needed to be in. He quickly heads to his hatch and opens it. He squeezes himself quickly into it and closes it tight, sealing him in. He takes a deep breath in and holds it. He listens for any footsteps or bread breathing coming into his alley. He lets out his breath slowly and shakily when he doesn't hear anything for a while, but he still doesn't move. He couldn't get caught. Izuku finally crawls free of his hole when the light outside starts to get dark and his stomach begins to grumble. He was sure Dabi was going to be worried about him because this quick search was supposed to be just that, quick. Izuku didn't quite get the passage of time anyway. It always seemed a little fuzzy. It went too quickly or moved like molasses, so he didn't quite care for it. He shakes out his limbs and winces when it pulls on all of his injuries. He carefully treads out of the alley and looks around the street. Some of the people walking by give him weird looks, but he doesn't pay any mind. He wanted to get back to Dabi and take care of his injuries. When he doesn't see a single sign of the electric blue person, he steps into the crowd and makes his way towards Dabi's place. He tries to do his best to not bump into people and aggravate his wounds, but there isn't much that he can do in the crowded streets. Izuku stumbles up the fire escape and clambers into Dabi's apartment. Dabi w's around to stare at Izuku the second that his foot hits the floor. "Where the hell have you been? I thought you said it was going to take like an hour max." Dabi demands a growl in their throat. Izuku huffs as he steadies himself on the chair by the window. "Stuff happened," Izuku mumbles as he pushes himself towards the bathroom. He didn't like having dried blood on his skin, and he could smell the man on him still. It felt as if his stench had seeped into his bones. "Hey, you can't just say, 'Stuff happened,' and walk away without more of an explanation. You were gone way too long, and I thought we agreed that communication was better, especially for how long we were going to be gone for," Dabi grumbles. Izuku frowns and continues his stumble to the bathroom. He didn't have time to explain this stuff. He didn't want to anyways. He didn't see how it was that big of a deal anyways. This stuff used to happen to him all the time. It wasn't unusual for him. "Izuku," Dabi snaps. Izuku flinches but continues. He stumbles into the wall just before the bathroom door and has to steady himself before he opens the door. He quickly skitters into the bathroom and slams the door behind him when he hears Dabi start to step towards him. Izuku locks the door as he slumps to the floor. He takes a deep breath and lets out a shaky one. He wouldn't cry. He was fine. Nothing happened. It wasn't even Seiki. It was just some random man in an alley. Izuku's lip wobbles and he bites down on it hard. He wouldn't cry. He closes his eyes and digs his nails into the wounds on his arms. He winces in pain, but the welling of tears in his eyes stops. He shakes out his head and turns on the shower from his spot on the floor. He undresses himself and crawls into the shower, not bothering to stand. This was too familiar. It felt too much like after every time Seiki. Izuku stops his train of thought there. He was fine. Nothing happened. He just needed to clean his wounds. He was a little sweaty and gross too. He was fine. Izuku shoves himself onto shaky legs and starts to wash his body. He was just cleaning his wounds and the blood off his body. There was no other reason for this shower. He was fine. Nothing happened. There was no stench soaked into his bones, just blood and grime. Izuku finishes washing up and steps out of the shower. He looks down at his clothes and his breath catches in his throat. He was fine. It was fine. He'll just put different clothes on. He didn't want to put dirty clothes on after all. That's the only reason he wouldn't want to put the ones he was wearing back on. He was fine. Izuku's eyes jump around the bathroom and he realizes he forgot a towel. That was fine. He didn't care if Dabi saw him naked. It was fine. He reaches for the door handle to head out into the hall, but his whole body freezes up. Maybe he could just live naked in the bathroom until he died. He didn't need to go out and get food. It was fine. He was fine. He could stew in his misery in a puddle on the bathroom floor. No need to go out. He was fine. Izuku shivers as he stares blankly at the wall across from him. The smell of food had started to slink into the room, making Izuku's stomach grumble. He huffs and squishes himself further into his corner. He didn't need to leave the bathroom. He didn't. A quiet knock sounds on the door and Izuku tries to shove himself into the very wall. "Izuku," Dabi murmurs from the other side of the door. A whimper escapes from Izuku's pressed lips. He hears a deep sigh from the other side of the door and a quiet thunk. "Izuku," Dabi starts again, "I didn't mean to yell at you. I was just worried sick when you didn't come back when you said you would. They pause for a moment and mumble, would you please just come out of the bathroom? I miss your presence in the apartment. Izuku shakes his head even though he knows that Dabi couldn't possibly see that. He couldn't leave the safety of his bathroom. He couldn't let Seiki get him. He had to be safe, he was safe in the bathroom. I brought you some fresh clothes and I made you your favorite meal, Dabi bribes. Not rat, they quickly add. That little comment causes a strained laugh to break free of his throat. How about I leave this stuff right by where the door opens and I will go sit in the living room and if you feel up to it you can come join me, Dabi compromises. Izuku hums and listens to the soft footsteps as they do as they said. Izuku gingerly lifts himself off the floor and away from his corner. He pauses right before he goes to unlock the door. What if it was a trap? He couldn't get caught. Who was to say Seiki wasn't right outside this door right now? Izuku squishes himself to the ground and scans beneath the door. He doesn't see any shadows from a person but he still takes a deep sniff to catch any unfamiliar, or too familiar, scent. When he only smells Dabi's comforting scent and the scent of his meal, he unlocks the door and opens it just a hair. He strikes out and pulls the clothes quickly into the room and slams the door shut the second he gets the clothes past the door frame. He locks the door and takes a deep breath. No trap. He was still safe and he had clean clothes. Izuku slips into the clothes and relaxes when he gets a deep whiff of Dabi. These were their clothes. They let Izuku have something of theirs. Izuku feels more warm than he had in years. He felt happy. Izuku carefully opens the door and scans the hallway for any sign of Seiki. When he doesn't find any, he grabs his plate of food and makes his way towards the living room. He spots Dabi sitting on the couch eating and watching the news. Izuku bounds into the room and plops down next to Dabi. They make a loud wheezing sound when Izuku smashes into him. Personal space much, Dabi mumbles around a mouthful of food. Izuku looks up and blinks at him a couple of times. He wasn't sure why Dabi would mention personal space. Izuku was already in it by being in his den. Did he want him to leave his den? Dabi sighs. Don't worry about it, Kit, they murmur and ruffle Izuku's hair. Izuku leans into the touch and snuggles into Dabi's warmth. Dabi blows out a long breath from their nose and then slumps back into the couch. Izuku licks his lips and starts to dig into his meal. He was so happy that Dabi made this for him even though they didn't like it that much themselves. Izuku's eyes flick up to the TV to see what was currently on the news. He stiffens when he notices that the electric blue person who was chasing him shows up on the screen. He doesn't pay attention to what they are saying but he still watches while eating. Dabi chokes on their food when a blurry picture of Izuku clambering up the alley wall blinks onto the screen. Izuku freezes and tries to stay as still as possible. He may be smoshed against Dabi's side but maybe they would just forget that he was next to them and not say anything about it. So, Dabi starts slowly, what exactly was the stuff that held you up today? Izuku swallows the saliva filling his mouth and looks away from Dabi. Izuku, Dabi presses. Izuku sinks into himself and tilts his head further away from Dabi. Izuku catches the word vigilante from the TV just before Dabi's outburst. Okay, why the F are the heroes calling you a vigilante? What did you do? Dabi snipes. Izuku frowns and tilts his head. What I would normally do, help people, Izuku mumbles. Dabi inhales a sharp breath and opens their mouth before blowing all the air out of their lungs. Alright, you need to tell me exactly what happened because I need to know everything to be able to fix your mess. Honestly, do you want to be arrested? Dabi asks. Izuku looks up at them and tilts his head in confusion. Arrested? Izuku asks. Dabi groans and flops over the arm of the couch. Okay, let me get this straight, you have helped people like you did. Today in the past? Dabi asks incredulously. Izuku tilts his head and considers the question. He had helped people in alleys before but not necessarily in the same way as today. Izuku licks his teeth and shakes his head. I've helped people before but not really like today. I've given people stuff they needed or I've helped people find stuff. I've also fought people like the day I helped you. I've never been chased by a person before though, Izuku explains. He liked helping people. He liked making them feel better, liked making them not feel like he used to feel. He wanted everyone to feel safe. Dabi nods their head and continues their pacing. Izuku tilts their head and watches as they walk back and forth in front of the TV. He wasn't quite sure what the big deal was. He only barely understood what the news and TV was, so he wasn't sure why it was such a big deal that he was on it. It was mostly just weird seeing himself in general. Alright, the video of you wasn't really all that great in general and you didn't do anything wrong, so you should be fine. Just stay inside for a couple days and everything should settle down, Dabi mumbles. Izuku pauses and blinks at Dabi. Stay inside? Izuku asks quietly. Dabi nods their head a couple of times without explaining something. Izuku didn't want to stay inside. He was finally allowed outside, allowed to see the sun, feel the wind against his skin. He could get things for himself, he could hunt. Seiki locked him inside, father locked him inside. Izuku really thought Dabi was different from them. Izuku's eyes flit over to the window and then back to Dabi. Maybe if he left while they were distracted he wouldn't be locked inside again. He wouldn't get caught, he wouldn't be trapped. He just couldn't be. Izuku slowly stands up off the couch and watches Dabi closely. They were still pacing back and forth, but they seemed to be distracted. He was sure he could make a break for it. He couldn't be trapped again. He just couldn't be. Izuku slinks towards the window while watching Dabi's movements. He was to the point that even if Dabi lunged at him, he would still be able to get away. His foot gently bumps into the wall and he freezes. His full focus goes back to Dabi, but they seem to still be lost in thought. Izuku relaxes slightly and leans back and finds the bottom of the window. He slowly slides the window open while still keeping an eye on Dabi. He just couldn't be caught and trapped again. He needed to get out. He needed to get away from Seiki. Izuku gets one of his legs out of the window and then the other. He quickly squeezes himself out of the window quickly and books it away from Seiki. He couldn't be caught again. He couldn't be trapped. He didn't want to get touched by him again. Izuku shivers as he huddles in the corner of one of his dens. He had started to get rid of a number of them because he was sure he was going to settle down and only keep one of them, but then Seiki found him. He was sure that was what happened. He couldn't quite remember, but he was sure it had to be that. He only had 3 now, the one he was in, another one a couple streets over, and then the one Seiki found. He was struggling to remember why he had that one in the first place. He missed that den though, and he wasn't sure why he missed it so much. Izuku shivers again and huffs. He pulls his blanket from Mama further around himself. It didn't help much, but it gave him some warmth. He felt like he was missing some sort of warmth though. He wanted to be somewhere warm, somewhere safe, but he doesn't remember where that would be. He wanted to go home. Izuku sneezes as he is racked with more shivers. He was so cold and sweaty, which made no sense to him, but he didn't understand his body. He just wanted to be warm, he wanted to be home. Izuku shivers again and squeezes himself further into his corner. He was so cold and tired. He would be fine if he took a little nap. He was just a little cold after all. "In it, Izuku, you're freezing." Dabi frets. Izuku whimpers and tries to move. "Don't move, you probably have hypothermia, you're so cold," Dabi stammers. Izuku leans into Dabi's unnatural warmth. Why had Izuku ever left Dabi in the first place? He couldn't remember. Izuku blinks his eyes open and tries to look around, but his vision is blurry. "My stuff," Izuku mumbles. He watches as Dabi walks away from all of his things. Dabi gently shushes him and runs their hands through his hair. "We can come back for it once we get you warmed up," Dabi consoles. Izuku whines but is too weak to even try and protest. He was so cold and Dabi was so warm. Izuku sighs and tips his head onto Dabi's shoulder and closes his eyes. Maybe he could just take another quick nap. He was safe now, he was with Dabi, he was with his safe person. Izuku flinches when Dabi pinches his thigh. "You need to do your best to stay awake. I don't want to lose you tonight, take it?" Dabi explains. Izuku groans and tries to say something, but his tongue gets caught on the roof of his mouth. Izuku's head lolls to the side again, but he keeps his eyes open. He was really tired. Why couldn't he just go to sleep? He couldn't get lost if he was sleeping. He should just go to sleep, right? He was safe with Dabi. He was safe. Izuku blinks awake and takes in his surroundings. He was squashed under 4 ratty blankets, along with the one Mama gave him, in Dabi's bed. He also noticed that Dabi themselves was lying next to him, radiating heat off of their skin. Izuku looks over to them and notices a crease in their brow while in their dream. Maybe he should get up to do something to help them. He didn't want them to be upset, even when dreaming. Izuku huffs as he tries to wrangle his arms out from underneath his small pile of blankets and accidentally bumps Dabi's cheek with his elbow. They snort awake and blink a couple of times before jolting up. "Oh, thank God," they rasp. Izuku blinks up at them a couple of times in confusion before the last time he was with Dabi seeps back into his brain. Dabi didn't seem like they were trying to trap him here at the moment though. Even if he was currently stuck beneath a couple blankets, he just felt warm. "You are insane for trudging out and hiding in a freezing but building during winter," Dabi scolds. They sigh and lean back against the wall. "I am glad you're safe, but why'd you leave?" Dabi asks, looking at Izuku. They had a look in their eyes that Izuku had never seen before. Maybe it was something he had seen on Mama once, but if he had it would have been a long time ago. Izuku swallows and contemplates how he wants to answer. If he was honest, would Dabi get mad at him and punish him worse than trapping him? If he lied though and Dabi found out, would that be an even worse punishment? "Hey, you're okay. If you don't want to answer right now, that's okay. I would like an answer though if you can give me one," Dabi soothes as they run a hand through his hair. Izuku wasn't used to touch feeling like it did with Dabi. It made him happy. Maybe Dabi wouldn't punish Izuku. Maybe they really weren't like father and Seiki. Izuku swallows and runs his tongue over his teeth before opening his mouth to answer. "I thought you were going to trap me in the den and I didn't want to be trapped again." Dabi's face contorts into something that looks like pain and Izuku panics. He must have said something wrong. Did this mean he was going to get punished or trapped? He didn't want to be. He thought he was safe with Dabi. Maybe he really did have to get out. Hey, breath, I need you to breathe, Izuku," Dabi quickly says as they sit back up. Izuku whines low in his throat and keeps trying to claw his way out of the blankets. "Hey, you're okay. I'm not mad at you, I promise," Dabi tries to soothe. Izuku shakes his head as he continues to escape his fuzzy confinement. Dabi must be lying to him to get him to stay, to be trapped. He couldn't trust him, he had to get out. Izuku's thoughts come to a halt as Dabi pulls him into their side. They slowly wrap both arms around him and run their fingers through his hair. They start to hum a tune that Izuku doesn't recognize but is oddly soothing. For the first time in probably years, Izuku cries. He turns around in Dabi's hold and clings to him as he sobs into their chest. Dabi doesn't pause for a moment as they continue to hum their tune and start to rock Izuku side to side. Maybe Dabi really was safe, they had to be. Izuku wasn't sure if he could handle it if they really weren't. He needed Dabi to be safe. He needed it. "Alright, we need to lay down some basic boundaries so that we don't keep causing each other problems or confusion," Dabi announces as they prop up a big whiteboard on the TV stand. Izuku blinks at them from his spot on the floor leaning against the couch. "Boundaries?" Izuku asks hesitantly. Dabi takes a deep breath before explaining, "They're like rules, but there isn't a punishment if you break them. It would just make the person who set the rules a little sad or concerned. Like one of mine is wanting you to tell me how long you will be when you go out, and one of yours would be like me not locking the windows and letting you go out. Does that make sense?" Izuku thinks about it for a minute before nodding his head. "Alright, great. I'm going to be writing them down on this board, so if either of us forget, we can just look at the board to figure out what they are. We can also add and erase any if we need to at any time," Dabi explains as they start writing out some stuff on the board. The very first item that was on the list was, "No dead animals in the apartment." Izuku pauses and blinks for a minute. "Can you add den next to or in replace of apartment?" Izuku asks quietly. The words often got jumbled up in his head and den always made more sense to him in the moment. Dabi pauses for a second before writing den after apartment. Izuku hums in content and continues to watch Dabi work in silence while occasionally adding his own boundaries. After they had finished, the list came to be, "No dead animals in the apartment den, be back in the apartment den by the time we agree on, no going in the bathroom when someone else is in there, always tell where you are going / what you are doing before you go out, no crotch touching, always eat at least one meal together a day, and no secrets." Dabi seemed incredibly concerned when Izuku mentioned the no crotch touching rule, but Izuku didn't want to take any risks. If Dabi was truly going to follow these, Izuku wanted them to matter and actually help him. Izuku knew that he was going to follow them as best as he could. They didn't seem too difficult to follow, and it was nice that they were written down. Dabi hums as they stare at the board. That should work for now. We can always add more if we need to later. Just make sure to let me know when you add one and I'll let you know when I do, Dabi hums. Izuku nods his head and fiddles with the blanket in his lap. Alright, next thing we need to discuss is how you're going to be doing your whole vigilante thing without getting arrested, Dabi rattles on. Izuku looks up at them and tilts his head to the side. Vigilante? He didn't think he was doing anything of the sort. He wasn't even sure what that word meant. Right? Being a vigilante is basically just being a hero without a hero license. Actually, I think it boils down to using your quirk for heroism without a license, but those are just specifics, Dabi adds. Izuku's brows furrow further in confusion. He supposes he was doing heroic acts and being a hero when helping those people, but he couldn't be a vigilante. He didn't have quirk. He did always want to be a hero, so maybe he could settle for this even if he technically didn't fit the definition. Okay, Izuku murmurs and nods his head. Dabi grins at him before taking a deep breath. Alright, so to do this I'm going to help you. I wasn't really planning on it, but then my this douchebag of a hero said he hates vigilantes more than villains, and I really want to PSS him off. First things first, we need to get you and me some safety gear, and you desperately need a watch so you can actually get back in time, Dabi rambles. Izuku blinks a couple of times but just hums. He was sure he could get Dabi to re-explain this to him later. Izuku is wrapped around Dabi's left arm as they guide him through the mall. He thought it was going to be a fun experience because he was going to get stuff to be a vigilante, but he has decided it SC case. There were too many people who kept bumping into him with sticky sweaty skin or almost dropping food all over his shoes. He scrunches his nose up as the mingled stench of people and food wafts into his nose. He really hoped that this trip wouldn't be long, but Dabi didn't seem stressed whatsoever, so it probably wouldn't be very fast. Izuku stumbles a little and bumps further into Dabi, but he was just fine with that. If he could, he would become Dabi's backpack, and then maybe he wouldn't have to brush skin with other people. Other very smelly people. Alright, we're almost at our first stop. I took us to the farthest back store we need to go to first so that as we make our way out we can grab the rest of the stuff we need, Dabi murmurs into Izuku's hair. If it wasn't for his exceptional hearing, Izuku was sure the sentence would have been lost to the crowd. As they step into the store, Izuku can finally somewhat relax. The ever-pressing smell was still present throughout the whole building, and Izuku was sure it was going to be a pain to get out of his skin and clothing, but the amount of people lessened. Since we're not in the crowd, could you let go of my arm? I'm a little sweaty, Dabi asks quietly. Izuku looks up at them and stares in fear. He would rather die than let go of Dabi's arm right now. Dabi sighs and doesn't say anything about it and starts walking through the store. Izuku looks around the store as Dabi walks with a purpose through the tall shelf walls. There was an assortment of ball and clothing and sticks, but Izuku wasn't sure what they would even be used for. Dabi finally comes to a halt at a section of shelf that says clearance and looks at what's there. It was even more of a mishmash of random items that seemed to be thrown at the shelf and then just left there as is. Dabi starts to look at the little pieces of paper attached to certain items and mumbling to themselves before finally picking out a couple of items of clothing with plates on them and some without before they head to the counter at the front. Izuku stares out at the rest of the people in the store as they stand in a line to go up to a person standing behind the desk with a little light gun. He switches his focus to them as he watches them scan the little papers and then put the item in a bag. After they go through all the items, they then talk to the person who put them there, and they either put a card into a little screen or hand over cash. After that whole ordeal is done, the person then takes their stuff, that's in the bags, and leaves. Izuku wasn't sure how this system worked or why it was the way it was. It seemed unnecessarily confusing to him. Izuku huffs and spaces out as Dabi finishes up with their whole ordeal and they move on to another store. He tries to simply stay focused on the fact that Dabi was with him and not on the people who seemed to slowly be closing in on him. He could make it through this shopping trip, as Dabi called it. He just needed to stay focused on Dabi. Izuku blinks back into what's happening when Dabi nudges him with their hip. He scans where he is at and finds that they have made it out onto the street and completely left the mall. Izuku frowns. It seems like he lost a lot of time there, but he didn't like it anyway, so he didn't need that time. You doing okay there, Kit? Dabi asks gently. Izuku hums and loosens his hold on Dabi's arm. His arm stuck to Dabi's large jacket and came off with a gross sound. He didn't like that feeling at all, but he was getting pretty sweaty like Dabi had mentioned before. Dabi hums and continues on the walk back to the apartment. Once we get back, I'll show you how the watch works and we can set up the gear, okay? Dabi asks. Izuku nods his head. That sounded fun and was something that he could look forward to now. They just had to make it back to the apartment. Izuku blinks at the strap that Dabi secures on his wrist. It had a large circle attached to the band that had little lines and numbers in it. He thinks it's a small clock, but he hasn't seen one in so long that he wouldn't know. Alright, this is a watch. It's how you tell time, and this way it will be easier to communicate for when I want you back and when I will be back, Dabi explains as they let go of his wrist. Izuku twists his wrist and feels the newly added weight. To make it easier on you, I got little stickers that we can put on the watch for where the shorter line will be when you should be home, Dabi says after a long silence. Izuku hums and nods his head. That makes sense. He still didn't understand time quite yet, and he wasn't sure if he ever would. He wasn't too worried about it because it didn't seem all that important. Dabi nods their head resolutely and then claps their hands together. Izuku flinches slightly at the loud sound and Dabi winces. Sorry, I didn't think that through. Next thing we need to discuss is the vigilante business. I got you some knee and elbow pads and some thicker briefs. I also bought you a mask and a hoodie to help hide your identity, Dabi explains. Izuku nods as Dabi rambles on. I got some similar stuff for myself, but with my quirk I need my arms free. I also got a sewing kit if anything rips or you want to sew anything on it. Izuku hums and Dabi turns around and grabs their bag of items and hands Izuku a bunch of items. Izuku looks at them and blinks. Dabi drops the rest of the stuff behind themselves and plops to the floor. Alright, these things with straps are the knee and elbow pads. The larger ones are for your knees and they just slip on over or under your clothes, and I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. You are welcome to modify the stuff however you want, so you can cut anything off or sew anything on, Dabi rambles. Izuku looks back over everything and tilts his head. How do you sew? Izuku asks quietly. Dabi sits up straight with a sparkle in their eyes and grabs a box. Izuku hums quietly as he sews his knee pads onto the briefs. He didn't like the feeling of straps. It felt too much like the straps he had for the experiments. The watch he had on his wrist was also bothering him, but he would deal with it for Dabi. Izuku didn't like the elbow pads whatsoever, so he just threw those in the corner with the rest of his collection of things. Dabi had given him that corner all to himself and had even gone back to his other den and collected the rest of his things. He still needed to go to one more, but that could wait. Izuku looks at the plain gray of the clothing and frowns. It was better than the solid white that he was used to, but it reminded him too much of that place. The place devoid of color and life. Is there a way to add color to the clothes? He asks Dabi, still frowning at the briefs. We could add patches of fabric, but I don't think I have the money to get that much fabric to be used so little. You could embroider it, I suppose. I think I still have some thread for that, Dabi explains slowly from their spot on the couch. They get up with a groan and Izuku watches them leave into the hallway and their room. Izuku turns back to his briefs to finish sewing on the knee pad. He continues to hum a tune as he finishes his stitch and ties it before snapping the extra thread off. Dabi saunters back over and drops a bag of bright-colored thread in front of Izuku. They then flop back onto the couch and tune back into the news. Izuku stares at them for a moment before huffing and looking back at the thread. They must just be tired, or maybe something happened. Izuku looks through the thread colors and chooses one he likes and gets to work. He wanted to have it be covered in colors and would much rather have the base color not be black, but he was sure Dabi got it that color for a reason. Izuku stretches after he climbs out of the window. He was going out in his new outfit. Dabi called it a costume, but Izuku thought it was more of an outfit. They also weren't happy that Izuku was going out, but he wanted to find more trinkets. Izuku prances down the fire escape and begins the prowl. He was hoping he could find some more shiny things to add to his collection. Dabi said it was gross, so Izuku growled at him. He thought a lot of the things Dabi did were gross, but he never complained. Izuku starts to hum a tune as he turns down an alley he hadn't been in a while. He perks up immediately when he finds a knife on the ground. He didn't see them very often, but they were always super shiny once he rubbed all the grime off of them. This one seemed to have blood on it, which was always difficult to get off, but he could do it. Izuku takes one of the strings he brings with him and ties the knife to one of the loops on his briefs. He skips over to the dumpster once he's sure that the knife is secure and isn't going to fall. He's almost lost a foot from that happening before. Izuku pushes himself up onto his tiptoes and peeks over the edge of the dumpster. He scrunches up his nose but scours the piles of trash for something that'll glisten. He frowns and drops back down onto his feet when he doesn't find anything that immediately sparks his interest. Izuku spins on his heel and marches out of the alley. He was glad he at least got his new knife, but he was really wanting to find something more. Maybe even grab a quick snack. He thinks the rats were catching on to him and starting to hide better. Izuku frowns further and slows his pace. Maybe he could change where he looked. Dabi never said anything about staying in the area, just about getting back on time. Which reminds him to look down at his watch. It had barely changed from when he first left. Not even close to his little smiley sticker, which was when he needed to be back by. Izuku shakes his head and picks up his pace again. He was going to go somewhere new, and he was sure he would be able to find some more things to add to his pile there, or at least a tasty treat. He really wished Dabi would let him keep his extra ones in the apartment. It made things so much easier. Izuku continues his tune where he left off and finds a fire escape and quickly scales it to the roof. It was much easier to get to other places on the rooftops. He wasn't sure why more people didn't do this. The streets were so annoying and crowded all the time, and the roofs never were. Izuku jumps and snags the edge of a higher roof and pulls himself up on top of it. He wasn't sure where he would stop, maybe when things started to get unfamiliar, or at least places he hadn't been since settling in with Dabi. Izuku abruptly stops humming when he hears shouting coming from the alley next to the building he was currently on. He creeps over to the edge of the building and looks down on what's happening. Izuku tilts his head and watches as a group of people shout and wave their arms at each other. They look rather silly, but he thinks they were trying to be threatening. Maybe if he was down with them they would be. Izuku scans the roof and finds a ladder down and starts to slowly climb down towards the group. They are so preoccupied with whatever they are fighting about they don't even notice him when he drops down. Izuku's eyes zero in on a glint from one of the people's wrists. It looked so shiny and nice. He wanted it. Dabi said to not take things from people directly, but they weren't here, so they couldn't tell him what to do, and what he wanted to do was get that shiny thing. Izuku crouches down and creeps along the wall towards that person when suddenly one of the people from across them pulls out a gun and shoots the person with the shiny thing. Izuku freezes and watches as they drop to the ground. Maybe he should have been paying more attention to what they were actually saying and not just the shiny objects on or around them. Izuku moves his focus to the person with the gun along with two of the other people. They must not be with the gun person. They also looked incredibly afraid, and he thought he could smell PSS. Most alleys smelled like that, so he really couldn't say. "Alright, now one of you two FS are going to give me my demon money or I shoot another one of you," the person with the gun yells. "Listen, Ito, can't we talk about this?" one of the other guys pleads. Izuku almost hums in agreement but stops himself. They still hadn't noticed him, and that was probably a good thing. He starts his journey towards the man with the gun. He really didn't want to watch another person get shot if he could help it. No, we cannot talk about it. Kato tried talking about it and looked what happened to that fucker. "You need to pay me my money," Ito yells, his tone getting more high-pitched the longer he talks. He seemed to be getting desperate. Izuku had just made it into pouncing range when he noticed Ito's arm flex. He quickly sprung towards his arm and grabbed onto his wrist. The gun went off and Izuku flinched slightly but still held on. "What the F-kid? Who the F are you?" Ito screams. Izuku ignores him and bites down hard on his wrist, causing him to drop the gun. Izuku lets go of his wrist and drops to the ground in a crouch, a growl in the back of his throat. "Did those two fuckers put you up to this, huh?" Ito screams back towards the exit to the alley. Izuku didn't want him to run though. He couldn't lose his prey here. No killing though, sadly. That's what Dabi said. It would be a waste as well since he couldn't eat this prey. Ito turns and starts to run, but Izuku is ready. He quickly pushes off and lands on the man's back, and he slams to the ground. His head hits the pavement with a loud crack. When the man doesn't get back up, Izuku turns to the other two to see if they need any more help, but one of them has picked up the gun and is pointing it at him. Izuku freezes all his movements and takes slow measured breaths as he watches the one with the gun. "Stay back. I'm warning you, I don't want any trouble, just stay away from me," they warn, a shake in their voice. Izuku watches as their arm shakes and they back themselves slowly into the alley. Why you would back yourself into a corner he wouldn't know. Just run past him, it wasn't like he was after them in the first place anyways. Now they were pointing a gun at him for no good reason after all. Izuku watches them carefully as he slowly creeps towards them. They both seemed so afraid they barely seemed to notice his movements. The one with the gun glances over to their friend for a brief second, and that's when Izuku makes his move. Izuku shoves the arm with the gun down and it goes off again. He winces slightly when he feels a slight sting in his calf but ignores it. It wasn't even that bad, not even comparable to pain he's felt before. Izuku takes his elbow and slams it into the person's neck, something he's seen other people on the street do before. The person drops the gun and stumbles back, but Izuku has a hold of their wrist. He uses his grip to pull them forward slightly and punches them in the jaw. He hears a crack as they drop to the ground. Izuku turns his sights to the other person as they come at them swinging. He quickly crouches and dodges the punch. The person doesn't stop moving though and ends up hitting his back. It takes both their legs out from under them and they slam their head into the opposite wall and drop to the ground as well. Izuku blinks at the four people and frowns. What a mess, he didn't even want to take those people down either. He huffs and catches sight of the shiny thing again, which instantly lifts his mood. Izuku goes back to the original man and finds the shiny object. It was a watch. Izuku never noticed these before he got his. It was so shiny, much shinier than his was. Izuku crouches down and grabs the man's arm and gets his fingers under the watch. He pauses and snaps his head up when he hears a sound above him. His eyes land on a man crouched on the edge of the rooftop. He seemed to have white tendrils floating around him. Izuku closes his hand completely around the watch circle. The watch comes loose with a loud snap as he yanks it close to his chest. The man shifts as if to make a move and Izuku bolts. Izuku pushes his feet against the pavement hard. His breath came in quick breaths and his stinging calf burns. He wasn't sure how he kept getting himself into these situations. Dabi was going to be so mad at him. Izuku stumbles when his injured leg steps wrong. He quickly shakes his head and recovers and keeps moving. He quickly turns into an alley that he somewhat recognizes and turns towards a dead end. Izuku quickly w's around to try a different path but tenses when he sees that the man was at the entrance. He licks his teeth and crouches down slightly and bares his teeth. He takes hesitant steps back as the man steps towards him. He needed to keep distance between them. Keep the man out of striking distance. The man lunges and Izuku dives to try and dodge, but his stupid calf refuses to respond like normal. The man barely clips his shoulder with his fist. Izuku makes a loud chuff in the back of his throat. Izuku sees an opening to the entrance of the alley and goes to break for it. The man's weird tendrils are suddenly back and wrap around his middle, snagging his arms as well. Hideous as the tendrils squeeze his stomach. He stops himself from throwing everything up. He didn't want to waste the meal that Dabi had so nicely made for him. Izuku slips and falls to the ground when the tendrils get yanked back. He catches himself on his hands and they land with a crack. He frowns but ignores it for now. He could deal with his injuries later, they didn't even hurt anyways. His calf was starting to burn and scream at him, but he could take it. He had to. Izuku's suddenly yanked up by the back of his shirt and he is suddenly staring into two red glowing eyes. He flinches back at how close they are but doesn't get far. Now what is a kid like you doing fighting a bunch of people in an alley and then robbing them? The man asks, his voice gruff. Izuku's face lights up in indignation. He wasn't fighting them just to fight them, he was trying to protect them and then himself. He also robbed nobody, the man was dead and probably a criminal, so he didn't rob anyone. Finders keepers, that's what he heard someone on the TV say once. Izuku winces when the man tightens the tendrils. Maybe Izuku would have answered him if he wasn't trying to squeeze his meal out of his body. Izuku quickly surveys his body and his entrapment when he remembers his knife. He could reach it if the tendrils loosened just a little bit. He looks up to the hand holding him and gets an idea. Izuku manages to lunge slightly and sinks his teeth into the man's arm. The man yells out in pain and the tendrils loosen. Izuku quickly grabs his knife and gets his arm out of the tendrils. He swings his arm with the knife out and it sinks into the man's side. Izuku gets completely loosened from his entrapment and he takes his chance and bolts. Izuku hisses as his calf snags the window frame. Stupid leg and stupid injury. Izuku flinches when someone clears their throat. His eyes snap up and he sees it's only Dabi. He's holding a tube of something in his fingers that's smoking. I didn't think you would be back until the time we agreed on, Dabi grumbles, averting their eyes. They quietly shove the tube into a tray on the counter. Izuku had never seen either of these things before, but he didn't have the energy to investigate at the moment, no matter how curious he was. Am I not allowed to be back until that time? Izuku murmurs, one leg still out the window. Dabi's eyes quickly snap back to Izuku. No. You're fine, I was just surprised is all, Dabi chatters, hands waving around in front of their face. Izuku blinks a couple of times and hums as he crawls the rest of the way into the apartment. Izuku's eyebrows furrow when he notices that Dabi's eyes were red-rimmed. He'll have to ask later, but right now he has to assess his injuries. He limps towards the couch and collapses onto it. Izuku looks over at Dabi as they seem to frantically be putting the things they had out away. Now Izuku was really suspicious and curious. He really wanted to ask, but he also really didn't want to speak at that moment. Izuku lifts his arms and looks at his wrist and hands. He frowns when he can't twist his left wrist. His right one ached, but he was at least able to move it. He grabs his left wrist and hand and moves them around until he feels a popping sensation. He scrunches his nose up from the sharp feeling of pain, but it quickly subsides into a dull ache. Nothing he couldn't handle. Is that a FING bullet hole in your leg? Dabi suddenly exclaims from next to Izuku. Izuku flinches and snaps his eyes up to Dabi. He blinks a couple of times, then looks down at his calf. There was a bullet hole in his leg. That must have been the sting he felt when the gun went off for the second time. Yes, Izuku answers as he slides his breathed leg up. He scowls at the feeling of the wet fabric peeling off his skin. He had been bleeding a lot more than he thought. Okay, yeah, he have to do with that, let me just dash. Dabi stops as Izuku reaches down and into the bullet hole to find and dig out the bullet. Dabi GGS and quickly turns away from Izuku. Izuku just huffs and feels around until he finds the bullet. I was, going to say I could get you. Dabi pauses and GGS again. Get you some tweezers and, we could sterilize it before you put, anything into your leg, Dabi stutters out. Izuku frowns and finally gets the bullet out. Why would we do that? That just seems like a ton of stuff to do for no reason. Besides, it's much easier to find a bullet with your fingers than tweezers, Izuku grumbles. He was tired and his leg hurt. He really didn't have time to do all that useless stuff. He just wanted the bullet out of his leg and to get it stitched up. It's not like this was the first time he'd been shot either. They had all healed fine before as well. The ones with father healed better than the two he had fixed himself out here, but they still healed. Alright, well I'll go get the first aid kit and I, can stitch it up for you. Dabi rushes out before stumbling to the bathroom. Izuku hears him GG and heave a few more times once he gets to the bathroom. He didn't understand why Dabi was so sick all of a sudden. It's not like they got a shot or someone hit them. Maybe they ate something funny, at least Izuku thinks, that can cause people to throw up. Izuku is checking over the bullet and doesn't see any missing chips. He goes to stand up, but that's when Dabi comes back around and drops the first aid kit onto the floor next to Izuku. They have gloves now and put their hand out. Izuku drops the bullet into their hand and they put it into a bag. Izuku reaches down and grabs the first aid kit and digs through it until he finds a needle and thread. He quickly threads the needle and gets to work stitching the bullet hole back together. He thinks Dabi wanted to do it, but he was impatient and wanted to get to bed. Dabi often made fun of him when he decided to go to bed. Apparently it wasn't normal to go to sleep when the sun was up, that's when he was tired, so that's when he wanted to sleep. Maybe everyone else was just weird. Izuku quickly finishes his stitches and ties it off. He pushes himself off the couch and stumbles to his pile in the corner. Did you just stitch that closed by yourself? Dabi accuses. Izuku hums and collapses onto his pile. Hey, at least take your clothes off and change. I need to run and do laundry anyways, so I can just take your stuff too, Dabi urges. Izuku groans but complies and takes off his briefs and shirt. He quickly digs around and finds his sleep clothes and throws them on. Do you want to go through your pile of things as well and give me anything that needs to be washed? You can sleep in my bed, Dabi offers. Izuku whines but sits up and hands him all of his washable items. He pauses when he gets to his fox. It had blood stains on it and other mysterious stains, but he didn't want it to get lost. I'll be super careful with all of your stuff, I promise, Dabi mentions at Izuku's hesitation. Izuku bites his lip before finally handing over the plush. Dabi gently adds it to their pile and heads towards the basket they put all of their dirty clothes in. Izuku really didn't have much. Most of his things were once Dabi's or they just shared. Izuku manages to get himself up one more time and stumbles over to Dabi's room. He opens the door and collapses into the bed. He hasn't been in here since Dabi brought him back, and he wasn't sure why. It was so comfy and warm here. It also smelled like Dabi, and that was such a big comfort to him. Maybe he could make this his new sleep spot. Dabi can always share. Izuku burrows further into the bed and closes his eyes. He is just about to fall asleep when he hears the door open. I'm heading out and I'll be back in an hour, Dabi whispers. Izuku hums and lets himself be dragged into sleep. Izuku blinks awake when the sun shines in through the window and directly into his eyes. He slides out of the bed and winces when he puts weight on his calf. He frowns and looks down at the wound. Forgot to bandage it last night, but it didn't look infected. He quickly checks the sheets and only notices one small pool of dried blood, and that was normal. He'll just have to remember to bandage it today to keep it that way. He stands and ignores the stinging in his legs as he stumbles into the hall. He heads into the bathroom and pulls out the first aid kit from under the sink. He rummages around in it until he finds clean bandages. He lifts his leg up onto the sink and rinses it off. He grabs the towel that's hung on the wall and dabs it dry before wrapping it tightly. Izuku huffs and heads for the kitchen. He was surprised he couldn't hear Dabi in there. He couldn't hear Dabi at all, actually. Izuku frowns and slows his journey. He couldn't hear anyone else in the den, which was good, but it was still concerning that he couldn't hear Dabi. They were normally about doing things throughout the den. Or they were playing music, and none of those things were occurring. Izuku slinks into the main room and hears a slow breath from the couch. He crouches and heads for the couch. He slowly peeks over the side, then relaxes. It was just Dabi on the couch. Izuku furrows his brows. They were normally up and about at this time. Izuku never woke up before they did. Izuku pokes their forehead and they jolt awake, falling off the couch in the process. Izuku tilts his head and looks at Dabi on the floor. Jesus, Kit, you can't scare me like that. What time is it even? Dabi gasps. Izuku looks down at his watch and sees that the small hand was in between the 5 and 6. Between 5 and 6, Izuku mumbles, squinting at the watch. He still wasn't sure how this worked in showing time, but Dabi seemed to. He didn't see the need to plan his day around it either, like Dabi did. He would do things when he wanted to do them. Dabi groans and flops back down onto the floor. I didn't mean to sleep that long. It was supposed to be a 30-minute nap, they murmur. Izuku hums and turns to head towards the kitchen to find a snack. He still really wanted a fresh meal, and he should be able to find something tonight, if he doesn't get shot again. Here, let me make dinner, Dabi says as they pull themselves up. Izuku pauses and watches them head into the kitchen. His face twitches and he trails after Dabi into the kitchen. He stops at the doorway and watches them open and close the cupboards and fridge before leaning their head on the counter. Damn it, Dabi hisses. Izuku frowns. This was abnormal. Dabi always seemed so sure of themselves, but at this moment they seemed so unsure. Izuku huffs and Dabi jolts and looks over at him. They squint at him before their eyes light up. Hey Kit, is there anything in your pile you would be willing to get rid of? They ask slowly. Izuku blinks a couple times. Get rid of? Why would he get rid of his things? the things he found and got for himself all by himself. Maybe Dabi needed them though. They did seem pretty upset. Izuku hums and turns around to go to his corner. He needed to stash some of the items in other places soon anyway. Even if this was the only den he was staying in now, he still liked having different stashes. He perks up when he sees his stack of blankets and his fox. It was finally stain-free and poofed up again like when he first got it. He plops down onto the floor and quickly scoops his fox into his lap. His eyes flick over to the rest of his pile and he hums. He could get rid of a couple knives. He had 10 but he really liked all of the ones he had. They all had very specific uses, so maybe a no on the knives. Dabi pads over and sits down next to him. "We need to get you some holsters or something for your knives," Dabi comments. Izuku tilts his head. Why would he need a holster? The string he used wasn't that bad. "What's wrong with the string I've been using?" Izuku asks quietly. "The knife could very easily fall off or the string could break or get cut. The holster also makes it more secure so no one can steal it from you," Dabi explains. Izuku frowns. He didn't know people could take stuff from him. He supposed it made sense since he took stuff from other people. "I'll look for some on my hunts," Izuku hums. "Let's also organize your pile while we're here. If that's okay with you. We can put all your weapons in the drawer under the TV," Dabi explains. Izuku hums again. That made sense. It would also make things easier to find. Izuku was surprised at how much stuff he had. This wasn't even all of his stashes. He had his 10 knives, a bunch of random cans, which now thinking about it he could part with, not the tabs though, random shiny strips, which he could also part with, 5 shiny watches that he could get rid of. He liked the one Dabi got for him more than the shiny ones, a bunch of random bits and bobs, and 4 wallets. Dabi was especially excited about the wallets and Izuku wasn't sure why. He had only originally grabbed them because he was curious about what was in them. It ended up only being a bunch of colored paper with numbers and pictures on them. He had only kept them after because he didn't see a reason to get rid of them, or to really keep them. He had only grabbed 4 before he got bored of them because they were always the same. "Okay, so after going through your pile you're fine getting rid of most of this, right?" Dabi asks. Izuku hums. "A couple of the little figures and pins that I found I want to keep. I also want to keep the contap things but otherwise I'm fine getting rid of the rest of it," Izuku explains. He now realizes that a lot of the stuff he grabbed he didn't even really want. He just liked how shiny it was at that moment. Dabi nods their head with a giant grin on their face. "This is good, this is really good. Keep grabbing things like wallets and watches. It's good stuff to pawn off and get us some good money," Dabi explains excitedly. Izuku blinks a couple of times. "Why do you need money?" Izuku asks hesitantly. Dabi looks up at him with wide eyes. They open and close their mouth a couple of times before closing it and sitting in silence for a second. "It's how we have food for dinner, how I can buy new clothes for both of us, how we have an apartment to stay in. It's basically how we can do everything in the world and get everything. Well, I guess except for the stuff you grab, but that's a different story," Dabi explains. Izuku blinks. That made sense, he supposed. The weird papers must be money then. Maybe. Is the paper in the wallets money? Izuku asks. "Yes, and a lot of the wallets you've grabbed are high-end and we can sell them for a lot of money. Any jewelry you can find and grab is also great," Dabi explains. Izuku nods his head. He could do that for Dabi. It would make him useful and then Dabi would have no reason to leave him or get rid of him. He could be useful. Izuku sits staring at all of his blankets and clothes in his corner. Dabi had taken all of the things he didn't want to either sell or throw away. He also said he was going to get them some takeout. Izuku didn't know what takeout was, but Dabi seemed excited about it. Izuku starts to hum a tune and then grabs his knives. He moves them into the drawer Dabi told him to. He picks up one of his favorites and ties it to his belt loop. He could be back before Dabi gets back. He could head out and try to find some holsters and catch a quick snack. He wasn't quite sure what a holster looked like, but he was sure he could figure it out. He slips out the window and winces when the movement pulls on his wound. It huffs but keeps going. It wasn't that painful anyway. He's dealt with worse before, so he can deal with a little bullet hole. Just like he has before. He quickly scales up to the roof of the building and looks around. He could hit some of his normal spots, but that never had anything all that great in them. He'd have to go to some places he hasn't in a while. It'd be some good hunting grounds for his snack as well. It was just getting dark out, which would also aid him in his hunt. Izuku quickly surveys his surroundings before heading out in a direction he hasn't gone in a while. He was confident he could still find his way back, and before Dabi even made it home. Izuku freezes when he hears footsteps creeping into the alley he was rummaging in. He tilts his head to get a better understanding from where they are coming from and leans onto the front of his feet. Izuku quickly ducks as a fist swings right over him. He rolls to the side and flips around to face his attacker. He keeps himself low to the ground with a hand on the ground to stabilize himself. A woman with long red hair and mask stands across from him with a knife clenched in her fist. "You got my friend caught, you little prick," the lady growls. Izuku tilts his head to the side. He wasn't quite sure what she meant by that. He didn't even know who she was or who her friend was. "What do you mean?" Izuku asks hesitantly. He leans into his thighs waiting for her next move. He didn't like fighting people with weapons. It made things more annoying. The lady, Red, Izuku has decided to call her because her hair stiffens and her eyes seem to light on fire. "You care that little, you brat. It happened yesterday and you don't even know what I'm talking about," Red seethes. Izuku tilts his head further. Yesterday he didn't run into anyone besides the gun people, so maybe one of them. He didn't get anyone caught from what he knew though. What was the one guy's name again? Ito. Ito. Izuku guesses and takes a step back. "Yes, Effendi Ito. How effing dense are you?" Red hisses out. Izuku scrunches his nose as the smell of garlic and rot starts to seep into the air. It makes his lungs ache and he takes a step back even further. He really needed to get out of here before things escalated further. Red suddenly lunges and he barely has time to duck out of the way. He quickly pushes himself back up and snags her arm as she goes in for another swing. He yanks her arm forward and shoves his fist towards her face. He heard a loud crack and wasn't sure if it was his hand or her mask or maybe even her face. He didn't have time to figure it out. He quickly reaches for her knife and yanks it back towards himself. Red cries out in pain as he feels a pop in her arm. She releases the knife and drops to the ground. Izuku takes a step back and is going to leave when he spots something on her thigh. A weird flat slab of something was attached to her leg. Maybe that was a holster. The thing he originally came out here to find. Izuku takes a cautious step towards Red as she leans on her arms breathing. He just needed the maybe holster and then he could get out of here. He spots a buckle and reaches for it slowly. Suddenly Red lashes out and he takes a fist to the face. A wheeze escapes his mouth and he quickly lunges forward. He tackles Red to the ground and her head hits the ground with a thump. He snags the holster thing quickly and yanks it off of her thigh. He stands up and stumbles slightly. He didn't think her punch had affected him this much. He hadn't been this dizzy in a while. Not since he was with Father. He leans against the wall and manages to stumble out of the alley. His head was killing him. This surely couldn't be from only one punch. "You aren't going to get away with this, you little sheet," Red wheezes out. Izuku turns and watches as she takes a small stick with a bulb on the end out of a small box. This didn't seem good. He pushes himself up and starts to stumble away. He hears the sound of something being dragged against something and the sound of something igniting. Then everything is engulfed in flame. Izuku coughs as his eyes blink open and he squints into the flames next to him. He sees a shadow walking towards him and he quickly pushes himself up to his feet. How did Father find him? He thought he was being so careful. He stumbles forward and catches himself against the wall. He had to get away, he had to. Even if Father had used fire against him, he couldn't let it stop him. He swallows harshly as he stares back in fear at the flames. The shadow was gone. Where could he have gone? He wasn't safe. He had to get out of here, get somewhere safe. Izuku pushes himself forward and coughs harshly. He feels something slide down his chin and he wipes it off and looks down at his hand. He frowns when he sees red on his hand. How did he get blood on his face? Izuku wheezes again and gets thrown into another coughing fit. Once he finally stops coughing, he pushes himself forward again. His eyes darted around trying to find Father. He had to be around here somewhere. He spots something on the ground. The holster. Izuku bends down and picks it up. He had to get something out of this trip and he found this fair and square. Now he just needed to get back to the safety of his den. He also needed to do everything he could to stay away from father. He couldn't go back there, he just couldn't.